There are certain characters in television that you never forget. Characters who appear briefly but leave such a deep impression on the story that every scene they are absent from still feels haunted by them. Characters whose existence quietly changes the meaning of everything that surrounds them. Characters who are so carefully constructed by their writers that every line they speak and every action they take feels deliberate and loaded with implication, even on a first viewing when the audience has no idea how significant they truly are. Evil Morty is one of those characters. In the world of Rick and Morty, a show already packed with bizarre, dangerous, and intellectually challenging figures, Evil Morty stands apart. He is not a villain in the traditional sense. He does not want to conquer the world. He does not crave power for its own sake. He does not want revenge in any simple or petty form. What Evil Morty wants is something far more specific and far more unsettling once the audience fully understands it. What he wants is to leave, to be free, to escape from a system that he believes was built to contain and exploit people just like him. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. This documentary is going to take its time. We are going to walk through the entire story of Evil Morty from the very beginning, one confirmed episode at a time, using only the events that actually happen on screen. No fan theories, no speculation about what might have occurred between episodes, no invented backstory, just the facts as the show presents them, examined carefully and described in the order they unfold, so that by the time we reach the end of this story, the full weight of what Evil Morty represents can land exactly as the creators of Rick and Morty intended it to. So let us start at the beginning. Or rather, let us start before the beginning. Because to understand why Evil Morty matters, you first need to understand the world he exists in. Rick and Morty is a show about infinite possibility and its consequences. The central premise is simple enough. Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in the universe, a genius scientist who has mastered the technology of interdimensional travel. He lives with his daughter, his son-in-law, and his grandchildren, and he takes his grandson Morty Smith on adventures across time, space, and parallel dimensions. That is the surface level premise, and it gives the show its format, but underneath that surface, the show is about something more complicated. It is about what it means to be exceptional in a universe where your exceptionalism defines every relationship you have. Rick is brilliant, and his brilliance isolates him. He can see possibilities that others cannot. He understands the mechanics of reality in ways that make normal social interaction feel pointless and small to him. And yet, despite all of that intelligence and all of that power, he is also profoundly lonely, emotionally damaged, and dependent on his family in ways that he struggles to acknowledge or even understand. Morty, his grandson, is positioned as the opposite. Where Rick is exceptional, Morty is ordinary. He is an anxious, not particularly academic teenager who is dragged into situations that he is not prepared for and rarely comes out unscathed. He is nervous, kind, often confused, and frequently overwhelmed. He is, by design, the audience surrogate, the normal person caught in the orbit of someone extraordinary. The show plays with this dynamic constantly. It asks what it costs to be the person who travels with Rick. It asks what it costs Morty to be used, endangered, and exposed to the full horror of the universe at such a young age. It asks whether the relationship between Rick and Morty is truly mutual or whether it is fundamentally exploitative, with Rick benefiting from Morty's presence while Morty pays the price. And it is precisely that question, whether the relationship between a Rick and a Morty is fundamentally exploitative, that Evil Morty exists to answer. Evil Morty is, at his most basic, a version of Morty Smith from one of the infinite parallel dimensions in the Rick and Morty universe. He looks exactly like any other Morty. He has the same face, the same yellow shirt, the same approximate age. If you passed him on the street, you would not look twice. But inside, something went wrong. Or depending on how you look at it, something went right. Something happened to this particular Morty that changed him fundamentally from every other version of Morty we encounter across the series. At some point in his life, this Morty decided that he was not going to accept the role that had been assigned to him. He was not going to be the sidekick, the emotional support animal for a genius who saw him as a tool. He decided that he was going to take control of his own fate, and he was going to do it by turning the very system that had shaped him into a weapon that he would use against that system itself. The result is a character who is terrifying not because he is monstrous or alien, but because he is so understandable. Every step he takes makes a certain kind of brutal sense. Every decision he makes follows from the logic of his situation in a way that is difficult to argue with, even as it leads him to do genuinely horrifying things. He is the version of Morty who looked at the life he was being given and said no. What makes Evil Morty unique in the Rick and Morty universe is his combination of intelligence, patience, and clarity of purpose. Most villains the show presents are either chaotic, self-destructive, or limited in scope. They want want something specific and fail to get it. Evil Morty, by contrast, pursues his goal across multiple seasons with extraordinary discipline. He plays a long game. He shows his hand only when he is ready. He manipulates the most powerful organization in the multiverse with such skill that by the time anyone realizes what he has done, it is already too late to stop him. He is, in a very specific sense, the natural endpoint of what happens when a Morty decides to become a Rick. Rick and Morty is a show that delights in subverting expectations. It introduces genre conventions only to undermine them. It builds emotional moments and then deflates them. It presents itself as nihilistic and then quietly reveals deep wells of genuine feeling underneath the cynicism. It is a show that is constantly commenting on itself, on storytelling, on the nature of narrative, and on what audiences expect from their heroes and villains. Evil Morty fits perfectly into this tradition, but he does something more specific than just subversion. He functions as a mirror for the show's central relationship. Every scene he appears in recontextualizes Rick and Morty's dynamic. Every choice he makes raises questions about the choices that the primary Morty has made and continues to make. He is the what if, the version of the story in which Morty did not accept his role, and what that looks like when taken to its logical conclusion. He also functions as a critique of the structure that the show has built around its premise. The Citadel of Ricks, that massive organization of parallel Ricks and Mortys that forms such a significant part of the show's expanded universe, is revealed through Evil Morty's arc to be something genuinely sinister. Not just bureaucratic or inefficient, but built on a foundation of exploitation and control. Evil Morty is the character who names that exploitation explicitly and does something about it. In that sense, Evil Morty is the show's most politically serious character. He is not just a villain or an anti-hero, he is a figure who holds up a mirror to a system and forces the audience to reckon with what they see in it. One of the things that makes Evil Morty so compelling is how much the show withholds about him. For several seasons, his origin is almost entirely unknown. We see what he does, we see how he operates, we see the results of his plans, but we do not know precisely how he became who he is. And the show is deliberately careful about this. It never invents a tragic backstory to explain him away or reduce him to a simple case of cause and effect. What we do know comes entirely from what is shown on screen. We know he first appeared as the hidden master of a monstrous Rick puppet. We know he has been at work in the Citadel for a long time before his public appearance. We know he is ruthless, strategic, and entirely uninterested in the company of other Ricks or Mortys. We know that he has a specific vision of freedom that he pursues with absolute commitment. And we know that at the end of his story, so far as the show has told it, he succeeds in doing what he set out to do. That last point is worth emphasizing. Evil Morty wins. Not in the temporary, hollow way that television villains sometimes win before being defeated in the finale. He actually achieves his goal. He does the thing he set out to do. He escapes the system. He breaks the cage. And then he is gone into a multiverse that contains infinite possibilities, none of which include the control structure he just dismantled. Whether that is a triumph or a tragedy depends entirely on how you interpret what the show is saying about freedom, exploitation, and what it costs to be free. Over the following sections, we are going to trace Evil Morty's story from his first appearance to his final known action. We are going to look at each episode in which he appears or in which events directly relevant to his story unfold. We are going to examine what he does, why it matters, and how each piece of the puzzle connects to the next. We will look at his first appearance in Season 1, where he is revealed as a hidden figure behind a horror that shocked the audience. We will examine the Citadel, the institution that he eventually infiltrates and takes over. We will spend significant time with the episode that most deeply explores the Citadel's internal life and the social conditions that make Evil Morty's rise both possible and perhaps inevitable. We will trace his political campaign and his unexpected victory. We will watch him take power and use it in ways that are brutal and precise. And we will follow him to the end of Season 5, where everything he has been working toward finally comes together in a sequence of events that redefines what the show has been building toward all along. Along the way, we will also take time to understand the world he moves through. The Citadel of Ricks is not just a backdrop, it is a character in its own right, with its own history, its own politics, its own injustices and hypocrisies. Understanding the Citadel is essential to understanding Evil Morty, because what he ultimately does is incomprehensible without knowing what the Citadel is and what it represents. This script is built on what actually happens in the show. There are many theories about Evil Morty, some of them clever, some of them plausible, some of them genuinely interesting as interpretations of the material. This documentary does not engage with those theories, except where the show itself confirms or denies them. We are not here to speculate, we are here to document. This is not because speculation is uninteresting, it is because the factual record of Evil Morty's story in the show is already so rich, so carefully constructed, and so full of meaning that it does not need supplementation. Every scene he appears in is doing work. Every line he speaks is chosen carefully. The show's writers know exactly what they are doing with this character, and the best thing we can do to honor that craft is to look at it clearly and describe it faithfully. So let us begin. Let us go back to Season 1, Episode 10, the first time anyone ever saw him, even if they did not know what they were looking at. Before we get to that first appearance, it is worth spending a moment on what the audience knew about the Rick and Morty universe at the end of Season 1's first 9 episodes. The show had established its basic premise. It had shown us Rick's genius and his recklessness. It had shown us Morty's endurance and his quiet suffering. It had introduced the concept of the multiverse as more than just a plot device, but as something with actual weight and consequence. Parallel worlds where different versions of the characters live different lives, some better, some worse, some so alien as to be unrecognizable. The audience knew that Rick was one of many Ricks. They knew that somewhere out there were infinite versions of him, some more dangerous than the one they followed, some less. They had encountered a few of these parallel versions in passing, enough to understand that the multiverse was crowded and complicated, and that Rick's version of himself was not necessarily representative of what all Ricks were like. What the audience did not yet know was that there was an organization built on the existence of these parallel Ricks. They did not know about the Citadel. They did not know about the political structure that had grown up around Rick's genius. And they certainly did not know about the Morty, who had decided to exploit that entire structure for his own ends. All of that was about to change. Season 1, Episode 10 was called Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. It was a turning point for the show's mythology, and at its center was a mystery that, once revealed, changed the audience's understanding of what Rick and Morty was willing to do with its premise. The episode introduced viewers to the Citadel of Ricks for the first time. It showed them what an organization of parallel Ricks looked like, how they interacted, and what they used their Mortys for. And hidden inside all of that world building was something that would not fully reveal itself for seasons to come: the presence of a Morty who was not what he appeared to be. Evil Morty's story begins here, in this episode, even though the audience would not understand what they were seeing until much later. That is the kind of show Rick and Morty is. It plants seeds carefully and tends to them over years before revealing what has been growing all along. Let us now turn to that first episode and examine exactly what happens, step by step, with the care and attention that the material deserves. Before we move into the episode-by-episode analysis, it is worth understanding one final thing about Evil Morty as a character concept, because it frames everything that follows. In any given universe of the Rick and Morty show, the relationship between a Rick and a Morty is presented as close but unequal. Rick is the genius, the driver, the one who decides where they go and what they do. Morty is the companion, the assistant, the one who provides what the show calls brainwave interference, a technical justification for why Rick keeps Morty around, rooted in the idea that Morty's ordinary, chaotic brain patterns help camouflage Rick's extraordinary ones from detection. But beyond that technical justification, the relationship is also emotional, complicated, and frequently painful for Morty. Rick puts Morty in danger constantly. He dismisses Morty's concerns, he lies to Morty, manipulates Morty, and uses Morty as a means to an end, even while genuinely caring about him. The relationship is defined by that contradiction, genuine affection on one side and a fundamental imbalance of power on the other. Every Morty who travels with a Rick has to navigate that contradiction. Most of them, in most dimensions, seem to simply accept it. It is the life they have, the relationship they are in, and they make the best of it. Some of them are visibly happy. Some of them are visibly not. Some of them are broken by their experiences in ways that the show depicts with uncomfortable honesty. Evil Morty is what happens when a Morty does not simply navigate that contradiction, but decides to resolve it by force. He is the Morty who looked at the power imbalance and decided to flip it, who took everything he learned from living inside that system and used it to dismantle the system entirely. Whether you think he is right to do so, whether you think his methods are justified, and whether you think his ultimate goal is one worth pursuing, are questions that the show leaves largely open. It presents the situation and the response with honesty, and lets the audience sit with the discomfort of not having a clear answer. That ambiguity is part of what makes Evil Morty one of the most interesting characters in modern animated television. And now, at last, it is time to watch him in action. Section 2, First Appearance. Season 1, Episode 10, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. Season 1 of Rick and Morty established a great deal of the show's foundational mythology. It introduced the portal gun, the Council of Ricks, the mechanics of dimensional travel, and the emotional core of the show's central relationship. It was a season that was busy and inventive and frequently surprising. But in retrospect, the single most important thing that Season 1 did was plant a character in its 10th episode that would become one of the show's most significant figures. The episode is called Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. The title is a play on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the classic Spielberg film about humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. The wordplay is light, almost throwaway. The episode itself is anything but. The episode begins with a murder. In a dimension far from the one the audience follows, a Rick Sanchez is eating breakfast with his Morty. It is an ordinary morning by Rick and Morty standards. There are aliens and unusual technology visible in the background, but the scene has the feel of domestic routine. Then something happens. The screen cuts to a Rick lying dead in his home, and then another, and another. Across multiple dimensions, Ricks are being killed. This is not a minor incident. In the world of Rick and Morty, Rick Sanchez is widely acknowledged as the most dangerous and intelligent being in the universe. The fact that someone, or something, is systematically murdering multiple Ricks across different dimensions is the kind of threat that demands a response from the organization that represents them, the Council of Ricks. The Council of Ricks is being introduced to the audience here for the first time. It is a governing body composed of Ricks from countless parallel dimensions, operating from a central location called the Citadel of Ricks. The Citadel exists in a hidden pocket of space, accessible only by portal. It is a massive structure, a floating city built by and for Ricks, staffed and served in part by their Mortys. It represents the organizational capacity of an infinite number of the smartest beings in the universe, all cooperating toward common goals. Or rather, that is how it presents itself. The reality of the Citadel is considerably more complicated, as later seasons reveal. But for now, in this first glimpse, it appears as a straightforward institution, powerful, organized, and authoritative. The Council of Ricks convenes to address the murders, and their primary suspect is Rick C-137, the Rick that the audience follows in the main narrative. The reasons for their suspicion are technical and specific. The kills were carried out in a way that suggests the murderer has access to Rick's portal gun frequency, and the portal gun frequency associated with the murders matches Rick C-137's. Furthermore, the murders appear designed to throw suspicion on precisely this Rick, which the Council takes as evidence of his guilt rather than as evidence of a frame job. Rick C-137 protests his innocence. He points out that if he wanted to kill other Ricks, he is more than capable of doing so without leaving such obvious evidence trails. He is arrested anyway, along with Morty,
and brought to the Citadel to stand trial.
This is the audience's introduction to the Citadel, and it is deliberately overwhelming. The scale of the place is enormous. Everywhere you look, there are Ricks and Mortys, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They work together, they argue, they pursue different roles within the institution. Some Ricks are clearly authority figures. Some Mortys appear to be in serving or laboring roles. The visual design of the Citadel is busy and dense, conveying the sheer chaotic abundance of the multiverse made physical. What the audience is seeing, though they may not fully register it at first viewing, is a social structure. The Citadel is not just a building, it is a society with its own hierarchies, its own culture, and its own internal politics. The Ricks run things, the Mortys serve. That is the baseline assumption of the institution, and it is visible in every frame of how the Citadel is depicted. Rick C-137 is not impressed by the Citadel. He is openly contemptuous of the Council and of the institution they represent. He does not believe in the value of Rick collectivism, and he says so. His dismissive attitude toward the Council and the Citadel is partly arrogance, but it is also, in some sense, a form of honesty. He sees the institution clearly, and he does not like what he sees. The Council, for their part, seem to regard Rick C-137 with a mixture of professional respect and genuine irritation. He is acknowledged as exceptional, but his exceptionalism is a problem for them because he refuses to be governed. He insists on operating outside their jurisdiction, and this independence makes him a suspect when things go wrong. Rick C-137 manages to escape from the Citadel, taking Morty with him, and launches his own investigation into the murders. He is determined to find the actual killer and clear his name, and he pursues this investigation with the combination of brilliance and recklessness that characterizes his approach to most problems. The investigation takes him across several dimensions. He follows the trail of the killer, examining evidence, making deductions, and gradually piecing together what has been happening. The killer, it turns out, is not another Rick at all. The killer is using a Rick as a vehicle, a literal puppet, remote-controlled, operated by someone who wanted to use the appearance of a Rick to commit crimes and throw the blame onto a specific target. This revelation is the first major twist of the episode. The murders were not committed by a Rick who went rogue or a Rick with a specific grievance. They were committed by someone who was using a Rick as a tool, someone who understood how Ricks work well enough to weaponize one of them, someone with access to the technical know-how required to build the equipment needed to control another person remotely. Rick C-137 and Morty find the base of operations from which the murders were being conducted. It is hidden inside a pocket dimension, a small artificial space designed to be undetectable, built with considerable technical sophistication. Inside this space, they find something that is at once simple and deeply wrong. They find a bank of monitors. They find equipment that looks like it was used for remote control of some kind. They find evidence of planning and preparation. This was not improvised, it was organized. And wired into this control apparatus, they find a Morty. Not a Morty who has been imprisoned or forced into a situation against his will, as the audience might initially assume. Not a Morty who is a victim in need of rescue. The Morty in this room is the one who built it. The Morty in this room is the one who designed the remote control Rick. The Morty in this room is the operator, the architect, the mastermind behind everything that has been happening. This is Evil Morty's first appearance. The moment is carefully structured to be maximally shocking, and it works. The audience has spent the episode assuming that a Rick was responsible. Ricks are the powerful ones, the dangerous ones, the ones with the capacity for this kind of elaborate planning. The idea that a Morty could have designed and executed this plan is presented as genuinely surprising, and in the context of what the audience knows about Ricks and Mortys at this point in the show, it should be. But it is worth sitting with why the reveal is surprising, because understanding that is key to understanding what Evil Morty represents. The surprise comes from the assumption that Mortys are not capable of this. That a Morty, by definition, is not the kind of person who plans things like this. That Mortys are followers, not leaders, supports, not strategists, companions, not commanders. Evil Morty's existence is a refutation of that assumption. He is a Morty who became exactly what the world told him he could not be. And the way he did it? By exploiting the very assumption of Morty incapability to hide in plain sight is almost elegant. Who would suspect a Morty? Who would think to look for a Morty as the source of a string of Rick murders? The assumption of Morty inadequacy is itself the camouflage. In this episode, Evil Morty has already been at work for some time before the audience encounters him. The murders of the Ricks have been happening across multiple dimensions. Each murder required access to a portal gun, technical expertise to build a remote control device capable of overriding a Rick's motor functions, and the patience and planning to execute a multi-dimensional operation without being detected. Evil Morty accomplished all of this. He built a device that could control a Rick remotely. He used that device to commit murders across parallel dimensions. He structured the evidence to throw suspicion on Rick C-137 specifically, which suggests either that he has a particular interest in this Rick, or that C-137 was simply a convenient target. The show does not confirm which at this point. And he managed to stay hidden until the investigation brought Rick C-137 to his doorstep. When he is discovered, Evil Morty does not panic. He does not beg or plead or attempt to justify himself. He is calm. His demeanor in this moment is notable because it is so un-Morty-like. The Morty the audience knows is nervous, emotional, and frequently overwhelmed. This Morty shows none of that. He is composed, controlled, and seemingly unbothered by the fact that he has been caught. He escapes. That is the other critical thing about his first appearance. He is not captured. He does not go to prison. He does not face any meaningful consequence for what he has done. He engineered a situation that allowed him to escape in the confusion of events, and he slips away before Rick C-137 can do anything about it. The Morty who was discovered, the Morty who was the mastermind behind the murders, simply vanishes back into the multiverse. The escape is not an afterthought. It is essential to understanding who Evil Morty is and how the show is going to use him. A villain who is caught and imprisoned at the end of their first appearance is a solved problem. They can be revisited later, but they are contained. Evil Morty is not contained. He is out there, somewhere in the infinite multiverse, free and presumably planning his next move. This creates a very specific kind of tension in the narrative. The audience now knows that somewhere in the infinite dimensions of the Rick and Morty universe, there is a Morty who is operating at a level of sophistication and ruthlessness that should not be possible. And they know that this Morty got away. Whatever he was trying to accomplish, he is still out there trying to accomplish it. The episode does not dwell on this. It does not pause to explain Evil Morty's motivation or origin. It does not give him a speech or a manifesto. He is present, he is revealed, and then he is gone. The show moves on to other things, and Evil Morty disappears from the narrative for nearly 2 full seasons. The episode raises a question that it deliberately does not answer. Why was Evil Morty murdering Ricks and framing Rick C-137? What was the point of the operation? Several possibilities present themselves. One interpretation is that Evil Morty wanted specific Ricks dead, that the murders served some practical purpose, eliminating rivals or threats or obstacles to whatever longer-term plan he was pursuing. Another interpretation is that the murders were primarily about the framing, that destroying Rick C-137's reputation or getting him imprisoned or killed was the actual goal, and the murders of other Ricks were the means to that end. A third interpretation is that the entire operation was designed to learn something, to test systems, gather information, or probe the Citadel's response capabilities. The show does not confirm any of these interpretations at this point. It presents the operation as a fact and leaves the motivation opaque. This opacity is, in retrospect, clearly intentional. Evil Morty's motivations are being held back because revealing them too early would give away too much about where the character is ultimately heading. What we can say with confidence is that the operation, whatever its purpose, demonstrates several key things about Evil Morty. He is technically sophisticated, capable of building complex devices that require deep understanding of Rick's own technology. He is patient, having apparently planned and executed this operation over a significant period of time. He is ruthless, willing to kill multiple Ricks across multiple dimensions to achieve his goals. And he is strategic, having built the operation in a way that misdirected attention and allowed him to escape when things went wrong. These are not the qualities of an impulsive actor. These are the qualities of someone who has been thinking very carefully about what they want and how to get it. It is worth spending a moment on the controlled Rick that Evil Morty used as his murder weapon, because there is something genuinely disturbing about that choice. A Rick is, by general consensus of the show's universe, essentially impossible to control. Ricks are too intelligent, too erratic, too independently minded. The idea that anyone could build a device capable of overriding a Rick's autonomy and turning him into a puppet is extraordinary. Evil Morty did it, and the fact that he did it is a demonstration of something about him that goes beyond just intelligence. It shows that he understands Ricks deeply and intimately. He knows how they work. He knows what makes them vulnerable. He knows how to get inside their defenses, not just their physical defenses, but the assumptions they make about themselves and the world. This knowledge had to come from somewhere. It came from living inside the Morty role, from being adjacent to a Rick, from watching one operate up close, from having access to the information and emotional dynamics that define the Rick-Morty relationship. Evil Morty used what he learned as a Morty to weaponize a Rick. That is the inversion at the heart of his entire story. For the audience, the reveal of Evil Morty as the mastermind carries a specific emotional charge. This show has spent 10 episodes establishing the Morty template: anxious, dependent, kind, ordinary. Evil Morty takes that template and turns it inside out. He is a Morty who decided to be extraordinary, and the way he chose to express that exceptionalism was through violence and manipulation. There is something genuinely unsettling about that. Not because Evil Morty is monstrous in a cartoonish way, but because his existence raises uncomfortable questions. If Morty could be this, why isn't he? What has the Morty the audience knows been held back from? What potential has been suppressed by the dynamic of his relationship with Rick? And is the ordinary Morty, the anxious, kind, dependent Morty, really as ordinary as he appears? Or is he ordinary because the structure of his life keeps him that way? These questions are planted in the audience's mind by Evil Morty's first appearance, even if the audience cannot fully articulate them at the time. They are the questions that the show will spend later seasons examining in detail, using Evil Morty as the extreme expression of what they are really asking. After the events of the episode, the Council of Ricks acknowledges that they were wrong about Rick C-137. They release him, grudgingly, and he and Morty return to their dimension. The murders are left unresolved in the sense that Evil Morty escaped and was not brought to justice. The Council presumably opens an investigation, but the show never explicitly returns to this specific thread. Instead, Evil Morty next appears in a completely different context, having apparently spent the intervening time pursuing an entirely different phase of his plan. The Council's failure to catch Evil Morty in this episode is notable. The most powerful organization of Ricks in the multiverse, combining the intelligence of countless parallel versions of the smartest being in the universe, could not stop one Morty. That failure is the first indication that Evil Morty has something that the Council of Ricks fundamentally lacks: the ability to think outside the assumptions that intelligence and power tend to create. Ricks are brilliant, but they are also, in their own way, predictable. They think in certain patterns. They have certain blind spots, certain arrogances, certain assumptions about the way things work that guide their thinking even as their intelligence operates at a level most beings cannot reach. Evil Morty, having lived inside the Morty role, understands those patterns and those blind spots from the inside. He knows where the blind spots are because he has been standing in them. Season 1 ends, and Evil Morty disappears. He does not appear in Season 2. He does not appear for the majority of Season 3, but the fact of his existence now hangs over the show's mythology. He is out there. He has demonstrated extraordinary capability. He escaped without consequence, and whatever he was working toward before, he is presumably still working toward it. The audience, if they are paying attention, knows that they have not seen the last of him. The show does not introduce a character with this much care and specificity only to discard them. Evil Morty will return. The question is when, and in what form, and what he will have accomplished in the interim. The answer, when it comes in Season 3, will exceed most reasonable expectations. Looking back on close Rick counters of the Rick kind, with the knowledge of everything that happens later in the series, the episode is more impressive than it might initially appear. It does not just introduce Evil Morty, it introduces him in a way that seeds almost everything that will eventually matter about him. His technical sophistication, established here by the remote control Rick device, prefigures the extraordinary complexity of his later operations. His willingness to use violence against Ricks prefigures his actions as president of the Citadel. His ability to hide in plain sight, exploiting the assumption of Morty incapability, prefigures his entire political strategy. His calm when discovered prefigures his composed demeanor in later appearances. And his escape, getting away before anyone can stop him, moving on to the next phase of his plan, prefigures the fundamental pattern of his story, which is one of relentless forward momentum toward a goal that most people do not understand until it has already been achieved. The writers knew what they were doing when they wrote this episode. The seeds are all here. They are small and easy to miss on a first viewing, but they are real, and they are there, and they will bloom into something extraordinary in the seasons to come. For now, though, Evil Morty is gone, and the show must go on without him, building the world that he will eventually upend. Section 3. The Citadel of Ricks. The institution that makes Evil Morty possible. To understand Evil Morty, you must understand the Citadel of Ricks, not just as a setting, not just as a place the characters visit or an institution they interact with, but as a system, a social, political, and economic structure with its own history, its own logic, its own internal contradictions, and its own capacity for injustice. The Citadel is the context that produces Evil Morty. It is the environment in which his plan becomes possible. It is the institution he eventually infiltrates, corrupts, and ultimately destroys. And it is the concrete expression of everything he is fighting against. This section is going to examine the Citadel in detail. What it is, how it works, what it says about the Rick and Morty universe, and why it matters so much to the story we are telling. What is the Citadel? The Citadel of Ricks is a vast, self-contained community built in a location that exists outside the standard dimensional grid, a pocket space hidden from the multiverse at large, accessible through portals that only Rick-level technology can generate. It was founded by multiple versions of Rick Sanchez cooperating together, which is itself a remarkable fact given how aggressively individualistic Ricks tend to be. The stated purpose of the Citadel is to provide a safe haven and a collective resource for Ricks across the multiverse. It functions as a coordination point, a refuge, and a seat of governance for the Council of Ricks. It has its own infrastructure, its own economy, its own social institutions, and its own population, which consists of Ricks and Mortys. At its most basic, the Citadel is what happens when the smartest beings in the universe decide to form a government. And in classic Rick and Morty fashion, what results is both impressive and deeply problematic. The governing body of the Citadel is the Council of Ricks. The Council is composed of a selection of Ricks who hold authority over the institution. They make decisions, enforce rules, and represent the interests of the broader Rick community. They are the closest thing the Citadel has to a legislature or an executive body. The Council is introduced in Season 1 during Evil Morty's first appearance, and from the beginning, it is depicted as simultaneously powerful and somewhat absurd. The members are Ricks, which means they are all extraordinarily intelligent, all convinced of their own superiority, and all fundamentally difficult to manage. The existence of a collective body of Ricks requires constant negotiation between massive egos. And the result is an institution that is powerful, but also prone to the specific dysfunction that comes from an organization full of people who all think they are the most important person in the room. The Council has genuine authority. They can arrest Ricks from other dimensions. They can impose sanctions. They can decree policy across the Citadel. But their authority is exercised primarily in service of maintaining the Citadel itself and protecting the Ricks who live within it. They are, at their core, a self-interest group, an organization formed to protect and advance the interests of Ricks as a class. And here's where the Citadel reveals its deepest problem. Because the Citadel is not populated only by Ricks. It is also populated by Mortys. Every Rick comes with a Morty, or has access to one. In the Citadel's context, Mortys serve a variety of functions. Some of them travel with their Ricks as companions and assistants in the familiar way. Others work in the Citadel's infrastructure, serving in shops, maintaining facilities, doing labor. Some of them work in law enforcement. Some of them occupy other specialized roles. But the fundamental social position of Mortys in the Citadel is below that of Ricks, and this hierarchy is not incidental, it is structural. The Citadel is built on a specific assumption about the relationship between Ricks and Mortys, and that assumption is that the relationship is inherently vertical. Ricks lead, Mortys follow. Ricks are the exceptional ones, the valuable ones, the ones whose intelligence and creativity and capability make the Citadel possible. Mortys are the support system, necessary certainly, but not the point. This assumption has practical consequences. Mortys in the Citadel are paid less than Ricks for equivalent work. They live in worse conditions. They have less access to resources. Their word carries less weight in disputes. Their possibilities are constrained in ways that Rick's possibilities are not. The Citadel, for all its stated commitment to the protection of Ricks and their Mortys, is structured in a way that systematically disadvantages Mortys. This is not hidden. It is visible in the design of the Citadel from the very first episode it appears in. The way Mortys are depicted moving through the space, their body language, their relationships to the Ricks around them, the nature of the work they are shown doing, all of it communicates a social hierarchy in which Mortys are at the bottom. The show provides a specific technical explanation for why Ricks keep Mortys. The explanation is that Mortys' ordinary, undirected brainwaves provide a kind of camouflage for Rick's exceptional neural activity. A Rick traveling with a Morty is harder to detect using the tracking technology available in the multiverse than a Rick traveling alone. Morty's very ordinariness is useful because it helps Rick hide. This explanation is offered somewhat casually in the show, and it is easy to accept at face value, but it is worth examining more closely because it has a specific implication that the show is aware of. If Mortys are kept by Ricks primarily because their ordinariness provides useful cover, then the relationship between Rick and Morty is at some level fundamentally exploitative. Morty is useful to Rick not for what Morty is, but for what Morty is not. Not extraordinary, not detectable, not a threat to Rick's ability to operate. The Citadel takes this dynamic and institutionalizes it. It creates structures and norms around the assumption that Mortys are supporting players in a story about Ricks. It builds an economy and a social order based on that assumption. And it enforces that assumption through the weight of institutional momentum, the kind of inertia that makes systems perpetuate themselves even when those systems are unjust. The Citadel contains institutions specifically designed for Mortys. There is a Morty day spa, where Mortys recover from the stress and trauma of their adventures. There is a Morty school, where Mortys receive education. These institutions are presented with a surface reading of care. The Citadel is doing something for its Mortys, providing services and support. But the deeper reading of these institutions is more troubling. The Morty Day Spa exists because Mortys are regularly traumatized by their experiences. It is a coping mechanism for the consequences of an exploitative relationship, not a solution to the exploitation. The Morty School exists to train Mortys to serve their function more effectively, to be better companions, better supports, better camouflage for Ricks. These institutions do not exist to help Mortys become more than Mortys. They exist to help Mortys be Mortys more efficiently. That distinction matters enormously once you understand what Evil Morty is reacting to. In Season 3's glimpse of the Citadel, the audience is shown a factory that produces a product called Simple Rick's Wafers. The factory is staffed by Morty workers, and it is revealed that inside the factory, there is a Rick who is being kept in a dream state, held in a perpetual experience of a happy memory, his emotional state harvested and used as an ingredient in the product.
This is one of the Citadel's darker details. A Rick is being literally imprisoned and exploited for his emotional experience, kept in a state of manufactured happiness, while his labor, the labor of generating that happiness, is commodified and sold. The fact that this Rick is experiencing something he would describe as bliss does not change the fact that he is being held against his will and his consciousness is being used as a resource. The Simple Rick's factory is presented in the episode with a kind of deadpan horror that is characteristic of the show's best satirical writing. It is horrifying, but it is presented as normal, as just another fact of life in the Citadel. The workers at the factory, many of them Mortys, simply go about their duties. The management does not perceive a moral problem. The product is popular, the system works, in the sense that it produces a desired outcome. But the system works by treating a person as a resource. And that logic, the logic of treating beings as resources rather than as people, is the logic that defines the Citadel at its most fundamental level. The Citadel has a political geography that reflects its social hierarchy. The nicer parts of the Citadel are where Ricks live and work. The less desirable areas are where Mortys are concentrated. This is not a coincidence or an oversight. It is a direct expression of the hierarchy's material consequences. When the show depicts the Citadel in detail in Season 3, it shows us streets and neighborhoods and social spaces that look like a city stratified along lines of inequality. There are areas that are clearly prosperous, well-maintained, vibrant. And there are areas that are clearly not. Poorer, more run down, more dangerous. The correlation between these conditions and the Rick-Morty hierarchy is explicit. This geography becomes important to the story in Season 3's Ricklantis Mixup episode, which we will examine in detail in the next section. For now, it is enough to note that the Citadel is not a community of equals. It is a community built on inequality, and that inequality has physical, economic, and social dimensions that are deeply entrenched. The primary Rick that the audience follows, Rick C-137, the Rick of the show's main continuity, has a complicated relationship with the Citadel. He is not a member of it in any meaningful sense. He operates outside its jurisdiction, rejects its authority, and does not consider himself bound by its norms or rules. This is a source of ongoing tension between him and the Council. Rick C-137 is, by some accounts, the most capable Rick in the multiverse. He is certainly one of the most independent. His refusal to participate in the Citadel's collective is both a statement about his own exceptionalism and an implicit critique of the institution. He does not trust collective governance. He does not believe that cooperation among Ricks produces good outcomes. He prefers to operate alone, on his own terms, answerable to no one but himself. This independence is, in some ways, admirable. In other ways, it is simply another expression of the same arrogance and self-isolation that characterizes all Ricks. Rick C-137 rejects the Citadel not because he has a sophisticated critique of its injustices, but primarily because he does not want to be governed. The injustice is incidental to his rejection. His own freedom is primary. Evil Morty's rejection of the Citadel, when it comes, is fundamentally different. It is not about personal freedom from governance. It is about the specific injustice of a system that exploits Mortys by design, and the desire to destroy that system on principle. For all its power, the Citadel has structural vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities become important when we examine how Evil Morty ultimately defeats it. The most significant of these vulnerabilities is the one that all-powerful institutions share:
the tendency to mistake stability for justice, and to assume that the persistence of a system is evidence of its legitimacy. The Citadel has existed for a long time. It has developed elaborate justifications for its structure. It has built ideologies around the idea that the Rick-Morty hierarchy is natural, necessary, and beneficial.
These ideologies serve the Ricks, who benefit from the hierarchy and are internalized to varying degrees by the Mortys, who are disadvantaged by it. The result is an institution that is difficult to challenge, not just because of its power, but because its power has been normalized. Evil Morty's strategy for defeating the Citadel takes this vulnerability into account. He does not attack the Citadel from outside. He does not try to blow it up or destroy it with force. He works from within, using the institution's own mechanisms against it, gradually accumulating power and positioning himself for the moment when he can strike. He exploits the Citadel's assumption that no Morty could be a genuine threat. He uses the institution's own electoral process to give himself legitimate authority. And then, when the time is right, he uses that authority to do what no force from outside could have done. He destroys the Citadel from the inside. But we are getting significantly ahead of the chronology. Before Evil Morty can destroy the Citadel, he has to understand it fully. And before the audience can understand his destruction of it, they need to understand what the Citadel looks like from the inside. Not from the perspective of its leadership, but from the perspective of the people who live and work and suffer within it. That understanding comes in Season 3, Episode 7, which we will examine in the next section. There is a long tradition in storytelling of using fictional institutions to examine the dynamics of real ones. The Citadel of Ricks is clearly operating in this tradition. It is not a direct allegory for any single real-world institution, but it draws on recognizable patterns of institutional behavior, the way that systems of hierarchy persist beyond any individual's desire to maintain them, the way that ideologies develop to justify existing power arrangements, the way that the people most disadvantaged by a system are often the ones who work hardest to maintain it because they have no choice. The Rick and Morty writers built the Citadel with considerable sophistication. They understood that for Evil Morty's arc to have genuine weight, the institution he is fighting against had to be more than just evil for the sake of it. It had to be recognizable. It had to have the texture and logic of a real institution, complete with genuine internal contradictions and moments of unexpected humanity alongside its systemic injustices. What they built is a setting that functions simultaneously as a location, a society, a political system, and a moral question. The Citadel asks what it means when the smartest beings in the universe organize themselves into a community, and answers that question in ways that are genuinely uncomfortable. There is one more aspect of the Citadel's place in the Rick and Morty universe that we need to introduce here, even though it will not become fully clear until much later in the story. The Citadel exists within a specific region of the multiverse, a region that is not the whole multiverse, but a carefully defined subset of it. That subset is called the Central Finite Curve. What it is precisely, and why it matters so much to Evil Morty's ultimate goal, will be explained in detail when we reach Season 5. For now, it is enough to note that the Citadel is not just a floating city in the multiverse at large. It is a floating city within a bounded system, and that boundary is essential to understanding everything that eventually happens to it. The Citadel exists within Rick's world, and Rick's world, it turns out, is a constructed thing, a specific subset of infinite possibility that was shaped and defined by choices that had nothing to do with justice or freedom and everything to do with one being's desire to be the most powerful entity in his environment. Evil Morty knows this, or at least he comes to know it, and what he does with that knowledge is the climax of his entire story. By the time the show reaches Season 3, the Citadel has become a more significant presence in the narrative. The events of Season 2's finale involved Rick voluntarily surrendering to a galactic government, not the Citadel, but another authority, which led to a period during which the Citadel apparently operated without Rick C-137's disruptive presence. The specifics of what happened to the Citadel during this period are revealed in Season 3, and the picture is not entirely flattering. The Citadel changed during Rick's absence. Political dynamics shifted, new factions emerged. the institution adapted, as institutions do, to change circumstances. And when Season 3's attention finally turns fully to the Citadel in a dedicated episode, what the audience sees is an institution in a moment of political transition. And a political transition is exactly the kind of moment that Evil Morty has been waiting for. The episode is called the Ricklantis Mixup. It is, by most measures, one of the most accomplished episodes in the show's history. It is the episode that does the most to develop the Citadel as a complex social and political environment. And it is the episode in which Evil Morty makes his most unexpected move. Section 4. Life Inside the Citadel. Season 3, Episode 7, The Ricklantis Mixup. Season 3, Episode 7 is called The Ricklantis Mixup. The title is a misdirect. The episode is advertised as following Rick and Morty on an adventure to Atlantis. But within the first few moments, that premise is set aside, and the episode pivots entirely to the Citadel of Ricks. What follows is 50 minutes that stand apart from everything else in the series. The Ricklantis Mix-Up is an anthology episode, but not a loosely connected one. It follows 4 parallel storylines happening simultaneously in the Citadel, each one following different characters and each one illuminating a different aspect of Citadel society. The storylines converge at the episode's end in a way that is both structurally elegant and emotionally devastating. And running through all of them, barely visible at first but increasingly present, is the figure who will reshape the Citadel entirely. This episode is Evil Morty's most important appearance in Season 3, and one of his most important appearances in the entire series. Understanding it fully requires understanding all 4 of its storylines, not just the one that focuses directly on him. After Rick's imprisonment, before examining the episode, it is worth understanding where the Citadel is at this point in the narrative. Rick C-137 was captured by the Galactic Federation at the end of Season 2 and spent time imprisoned. During his absence, the Citadel apparently went through a period of significant disruption. The Council of Ricks, the governing body, was largely destroyed during the events of the Season 3 premiere, when Rick C-137 engineered a prison break that, as a side effect, apparently caused the deaths of the Council's leadership. This left the Citadel in a state of political flux. The old governing structure was gone, or severely weakened. The institution needed new leadership. The particular conditions that produced this moment, an institution recovering from leadership loss, looking for direction, uncertain about its future, are exactly the conditions in which a determined, patient, strategically minded outsider can make a move. The episode opens with a brief scene establishing that Rick and Morty are about to go on an adventure. This scene is deliberately brief and slightly perfunctory. It is setting up the misdirect of the title, making the audience think they know what the episode is going to be about before pulling the rug. Then the episode cuts to the Citadel, and the real story begins. Storyline 1, The Factory Workers. The first storyline follows 2 workers inside the Citadel. One is a Rick, a version who works a low-skill job in the Citadel's infrastructure, a factory worker rather than a scientist or an authority figure. The other is a Morty, his assigned partner, relatively young and still forming his sense of himself and his place in the world. This pairing is immediately significant. In the standard Rick and Morty dynamic, Rick is the exceptional one and Morty is the ordinary one. But in the Citadel context, a Rick who works a factory job has had his exceptionalism flattened out by circumstance. He is just a guy, doing what he needs to do to get by, in a world where being a Rick does not automatically translate into prosperity or respect. The 2 of them spend the episode navigating a shift at work and the various mundane and occasionally harrowing incidents that the Citadel's environment produces. Through their interactions, the episode establishes something important about the Citadel's social dynamics. Even at the bottom of the hierarchy, even where a Rick and a Morty are both working class, the Rick still has certain assumptions about his superiority. The relationship is still unequal, even when both parties are relatively powerless. The storyline develops with genuine emotional texture. The Rick and the Morty form a grudging bond over the course of the shift.
They face situations that force them to work together and to rely on each other. They have a conversation about identity and possibility and what the Citadel structure means for people like them. And the Morty begins to show something, a spark of something beyond the passive, reactive Morty that the standard template describes. This storyline ends in tragedy. The two of them encounter a situation that they cannot navigate safely. The Rick is killed.
The Morty survives, and in the aftermath of that experience, something shifts in him. He does something with the knowledge and the freedom that the moment provides him. The Morty police officers. The second storyline follows two Morty police officers on patrol through the Citadel's more troubled neighborhoods. This storyline is the episode's most explicitly political, and also its most uncomfortable. The two Mortys are partners in law enforcement. One of them, the older, more experienced one, is a Morty who has internalized the Citadel's ideology deeply. He believes in the system. He believes in the hierarchy. He has built his identity around being a Morty who serves the institutions faithfully, who enforces the rules, who keeps order. He sees his role in the Citadel's power structure not as a constraint, but as a point of pride. The younger partner is newer to the job and more uncertain. He sees things on their patrol that make him question the system. He encounters situations that reveal the gap between the Citadel's stated ideals and its actual operation. He has not yet decided whether to accept the older officer's worldview or reject it. Their patrol takes them into neighborhoods where Mortys live in poverty, where the consequences of the Citadel's inequality are most visible. They encounter a situation involving a group of Ricks who are acting in clearly criminal and violent ways toward Mortys, and the episode shows what the law enforcement response to that situation actually looks like in the Citadel. It is not reassuring. The storyline also introduces the figure of the President Rick, the Rick who is running for the presidency of the Citadel in this election, presenting himself as a reformer and a change agent. The presidential election is the political backdrop of this episode, and it runs through all four storylines as a common thread. The Morty police storyline ends in a way that is both violent and pointed. The older officer's faith in the system leads to a direct and deadly confrontation with what the system actually produces. The younger officer is left alone, changed by what he has witnessed, to decide what kind of Morty he is going to be. The Simple Rick's Factory. The third storyline is the shortest and the darkest. It follows a Rick who has been imprisoned in the Simple Rick's Factory, the production facility mentioned earlier in this documentary, where a Rick's emotional experience of a happy memory is being harvested and used as an ingredient in a product. The imprisoned Rick is kept in a permanent dream state, cycling through the same happy memory repeatedly, his emotional response serving as the raw material for the product. He is aware, on some level, that he is in this state, but the machinery that keeps him there also keeps him in the memory, returning him to it whenever he starts to become aware of his actual situation. The storyline follows a worker at the factory, a Rick who has taken a job in this place, who goes through the motions of his work, who has perhaps never fully examined what the work actually involves. Through his eyes, the audience sees the Simple Rick's operation more fully, the machinery, the workers, the product, and the implicit assumption that this is an acceptable way to run a business. The horror of this storyline is not in any single dramatic event. It is in the normalcy. The workers are doing their jobs, the product is being made, the imprisoned Rick is in his memory, experiencing something that he would call happiness. Everything is functioning as intended, and that functioning is the horror. Because the thing functioning correctly involves a person being held captive and exploited indefinitely. This storyline is a direct commentary on the Citadel's economic structure. The Simple Rick's Factory is not an aberration. It is a natural product of a system that treats beings as resources. When you build an economy on the assumption that some people exist to be used, this is where it leads. Not necessarily to obvious cruelty. The imprisoned Rick is not being physically tortured, but to the comfortable, profitable use of a person as an input, as a component in a production process, with no consideration of their autonomy or their desires. Storyline 4. The Morty Election Candidate. The fourth storyline is the one that will define the episode. It follows a Morty who is running for president of the Citadel.
This is remarkable on its face. The Citadel has been depicted as a Rick-dominated institution, with Mortys in subordinate positions. The idea of a Morty running for president of the Citadel would seem, in the context of the institution's culture, absurd. Mortys don't run the Citadel, Ricks do. That is the assumption, so deeply embedded in the institution's culture that it barely needs to be stated. And yet, here is a Morty running for president. The episode follows him as he makes his case to the voters of the Citadel, speaking at rallies, engaging with citizens, presenting himself as an alternative to the Rick who is the other major candidate. The Morty's campaign is built around authenticity. He presents himself as someone who understands the Citadel from the inside, not as a Rick who has always been in power, but as a Morty who has lived through the Citadel's inequality and come out the other side. He speaks to other Mortys in a language they recognize. He speaks about their experiences in a way that rings true. He is, by any measure, a compelling candidate. He is also Evil Morty. It is worth examining what Evil Morty does in this campaign, because it is one of the most interesting stretches of his story. He is not running as a radical. He is not presenting himself as someone who wants to burn the Citadel down or dismantle the hierarchy or fundamentally transform the institution. He is presenting himself as a pragmatic reformer, someone who wants to make the Citadel work better for everyone, including its Morty population. This is a carefully calculated presentation. It is designed to be acceptable to a broad electorate, including Ricks, who would never vote for a genuinely radical candidate. It makes him viable in a way that an explicitly revolutionary platform would not. And it works. The episode's central political drama is whether a Morty can actually win the Citadel presidency, and the answer turns out to be yes. The campaign scenes are intercut with the other storylines, grounding Evil Morty's political performance in the social reality that the other stories are depicting. We see the poverty and the inequality and the institutional violence of the Citadel at the same time that we see Evil Morty speaking to voters about making the Citadel better. The juxtaposition is powerful. His campaign promises have real stakes because the audience has seen what the current Citadel produces. The election happens, the votes are counted, and Evil Morty wins. The moment of victory is presented quietly. There is no dramatic musical swell. There is no triumphant speech. Evil Morty receives the news of his victory with a calm that is, by now, recognizable as his characteristic mode: composed, controlled, unsurprised. He does not celebrate. He absorbs the information and begins thinking about what comes next. The other Ricks and Mortys at the victory gathering react with a range of emotions. Some are genuinely hopeful. They believe in what he said during the campaign, and they think that a Morty president might actually mean change. Some are uncertain. Some, presumably, voted for him grudgingly, believing he was the better option among limited choices without being fully convinced. What none of them know is what Evil Morty actually intends to do with the power they just gave him. The Ricklantis Mixup gives the audience more sustained time with Evil Morty than any previous appearance, and what it reveals is illuminating. He is, in this episode, a politician, performing accessibility and relatability and common cause with the Citadel's Morty population. He says the right things, he makes the right gestures. He presents himself as someone who has been where they have been and wants to make things better. Whether any of that is sincere is deliberately left ambiguous by the episode. Does Evil Morty actually care about Morty inequality in the Citadel? Does he actually want to reform the institution? Or is his campaign entirely strategic, a means to an end that has nothing to do with making the Citadel better for anyone? The show does not answer this question here, but it does give one crucial glimpse behind the performance at the very end of the episode, which reveals that whatever his ultimate intentions, Evil Morty is not being fully honest with the people who just voted for him. The episode's 4 storylines converge at its conclusion. The events of the other three stories feed into the political moment of Evil Morty's victory.
The social conditions depicted in the other storylines, the factory, the police patrol, the working class Rick and Morty, are all context for what it means that a Morty is now president of the Citadel. And then, the episode's final scene. Evil Morty, having won the election, is alone. Or rather, he is with the campaign workers who helped him win. The team of advisors and strategists and political operatives who ran his campaign. They are celebrating. They are talking about what comes next. And then, Evil Morty has them all killed. Every single campaign worker. Everyone who knows the details of how his campaign was run, what his actual plans might be, what conversations happened behind the scenes. Eliminated. Not dramatically or violently, efficiently. With the same calm composure that characterizes everything he does. This is the moment when the episode snaps into focus for the audience. Whatever you thought you were watching during the campaign, this is the truth of it. Evil Morty does not have political allies. He has tools, and when a tool has served its purpose, it is discarded. The people who helped him win the election knew things about him that could be useful to those who might oppose him, and so they had to be eliminated. The final scene of the Ricklantis Mixup is one of the most quietly horrifying moments in Rick and Morty's run. Not because the violence is graphic, it is not, but because of what it tells you about who Evil Morty is and what he is actually prepared to do. He was never a candidate, he was an infiltrator. The election was not a political victory for Morty rights or Morty representation. It was a tactical victory in a longer war. And the people who believed in that candidacy, who worked for it, who put themselves in service of what they thought it stood for, they were, from the beginning, instruments in a plan that had nothing to do with what they thought it was about. This is Evil Morty at his coldest, and it is followed immediately by the episode's last image, him alone in the presidential office, having begun, looking out over the Citadel that is now his to command. The Ricklantis Mixup is remarkable for what it accomplishes beyond just advancing Evil Morty's story. It builds the Citadel into a real place with real social texture. It gives the audience characters to care about who are not the main cast. It uses the anthology format to show the same institution from multiple angles simultaneously, creating a picture that is more complex and more honest than any single perspective could achieve. And it does all of this while also executing Evil Morty's takeover of the Citadel with precise efficiency. His campaign, his victory, and his first act as president all happen in this episode. It is a remarkable amount of story to tell in 50 minutes, and the show tells it without making any of it feel rushed. The episode ends with Evil Morty in power. He is now president of the Citadel. He has access to everything the Citadel commands, its resources, its technology, its institutional authority. He has eliminated anyone who might know enough about his operation to expose it. He is, by any measure, in a position of extraordinary power. What he does next will determine the shape of his story's conclusion. Section 5. The Presidential Election. How Evil Morty won the Citadel. Elections are, by their nature, performances. Every candidate is presenting a version of themselves to the public. A version designed to be appealing, to be trustworthy, to communicate a vision that voters can believe in. The gap between the performance and the reality is something that voters learn to navigate with varying degrees of success in any political system. Evil Morty's campaign for the presidency of the Citadel is a performance taken to its logical extreme. It is a performance constructed with total awareness that it is a performance by someone who has no intention of being constrained by any of its content once the election is won. It is a masterclass in political manipulation, and understanding how it worked tells us a great deal about both Evil Morty's capabilities and the Citadel's structural vulnerabilities. This section is going to examine the election in detail, the conditions that made it possible, the strategy Evil Morty employed, the voters he appealed to and how, and what his victory reveals about the institution he now controls. The condition of the Citadel before the election.
At the time of the election depicted in the Ricklantis Mixup, the Citadel is recovering from significant institutional disruption. The events of Season 3's premiere, in which Rick C-137 orchestrated a prison break that had significant side effects for the Citadel's existing leadership, left the governing structure weakened and in need of reconstitution. This is the explicit context that the episode operates within. What this means practically is that the Citadel is in a period of genuine political openness. The old guard has been disrupted. The normal channels of power are in flux. Whoever wins the presidency in this moment will inherit not just the formal authority of the office, but the de facto authority of a moment when institutional norms are in transition. This is an unusually powerful moment to claim political authority, precisely because the alternative centers of power that would normally check a president's ambitions have been weakened. Evil Morty did not create these conditions. They were produced by Rick C-137's actions and their consequences. But Evil Morty clearly understands the significance of the moment and is positioned to take advantage of it. Whether he anticipated this exact sequence of events or simply recognized the opportunity when it arose, he is prepared for it in a way that suggests either extraordinary prescience or very good intelligence about the state of the Citadel. The election is not uncontested. There is another candidate, a Rick, running on a platform of reform and change within recognizable parameters. The Rick candidate presents himself as a progressive, as someone who understands the Citadel's problems and wants to fix them, but through conventional political means and without any intention of fundamentally challenging the institution's basic structure. This candidate is, by most measures, a reasonable choice. He makes compelling arguments. He has political experience. He presents a version of reform that is plausible and appealing without being threatening. For many voters, he would seem like the safer bet. A Rick, yes, with all the complexity that implies, but at least a known quantity within the familiar political landscape. Evil Morty runs against this candidate on a platform that is, on the surface, more radical, but is structured to be broadly appealing. He speaks specifically to Morty voters, to the population that the Citadel's existing political culture has most systematically ignored. He offers them visibility, recognition, representation. He says the things that they have not heard from any Rick candidate, because those things come from lived experience that a Rick cannot have. Evil Morty's campaign strategy is built on several specific pillars. The first is authenticity, or rather, the performance of authenticity. He presents himself as someone who comes from the same experience as the Morty voters he is addressing. He speaks their language. He references experiences that resonate with them. He creates the impression that he is genuinely one of them, that his elevation to the presidency would be their elevation. The second pillar is contrast. Against the Rick candidate's essentially reformist platform, Evil Morty positions himself as representing something more genuinely different. He is not a Rick promising to be better. He is a Morty promising something that no Rick can promise, that the Citadel might be run by someone who understands what it is like to not be a Rick in the Citadel. The third pillar is simplicity of message. Evil Morty does not offer a complex policy platform. He does not get into the technical details of governance or the specifics of how he would change things. He offers a vision, a feeling more than a program. The feeling that the Citadel could be different, that Mortys matter, that the hierarchy might not be permanent. This strategy is effective precisely because it works on the level of emotion and identity, rather than on the level of policy. The Morty voters who support him are not evaluating his specific proposals. They are responding to the fact that someone who looks like them, who speaks like them, who seems to understand them, is standing up and claiming authority. That is powerful, regardless of what the specific proposals are. The complication of Evil Morty's campaign strategy is that Mortys alone cannot win the presidency. The Citadel's electorate includes Ricks, and enough of them would need to vote for Evil Morty, or at least be comfortable with his victory, for him to win. This is the part of the strategy that requires the most delicacy. Evil Morty does not try to win Rick voters by appealing to their interests specifically. He does not offer them something that benefits Ricks in the way that his Morty-focused rhetoric benefits Mortys. Instead, he calibrates his message to be not threatening to Ricks, to present his candidacy as a novelty, as an experiment in broadening representation, but not as a fundamental challenge to the power that Ricks hold in the Citadel. This is a calculated position. He is saying to Morty voters that he represents genuine change, while implying to Rick voters that he is a manageable deviation from the norm. Both messages cannot be entirely true, but the genius of the approach is that each audience hears what it wants to hear, and neither is given sufficient information to understand what he actually intends. The Morty voters of the Citadel are an under-examined constituency. They have never had a candidate who spoke specifically to their experience. The political history of the Citadel, as far as can be determined from the show's depiction, is a history of Rick governance. Ricks making decisions, Ricks holding power, Ricks determining what the Citadel prioritizes and how. For Morty voters, Evil Morty's candidacy represents something unprecedented. Not just a Morty running for president, but a Morty who articulates a vision of the Citadel that takes Morty experience seriously, who speaks with apparent honesty about what it costs to be a Morty in a Rick-dominated institution, who frames Morty subordination not as natural or inevitable, but as a political choice that can be revisited. This is genuinely compelling, regardless of Evil Morty's actual intentions. The things he says about Morty experience in the Citadel are true. The inequalities he gestures at are real. The pain he references is documented by the other storylines of the episode itself. Whether he means to address those inequalities or not, his identification of them as political problems that a political leader should address is more than any previous Citadel politician has offered. The Morty voters who support him are not being fooled about the diagnosis. They are being misled about the remedy. The episode shows fragments of Evil Morty's campaign rallies, and these fragments are carefully constructed to convey the emotional register of his appeal. He speaks directly and simply. He does not use the rhetorical complexity or the technical language that Rick politicians might deploy. He communicates at a human level, addressing his audience as equals. This choice of rhetorical style is itself political. It positions him against the kind of communication that Ricks default to, the jargon-heavy, intellectually dense, often deliberately obscure language of Rick intelligence performing its own superiority. Evil Morty communicates clearly because he is pretending to be simple, or because he has learned that simple communication is more politically effective, or, and this possibility cannot be ruled out, because on some level, he genuinely does feel what he is saying. The campaign rallies attract significant Morty turnout. This is itself remarkable in the Citadel context, where Morty political engagement has presumably been historically low, given that there has been nothing to engage with. The enthusiasm at these rallies is genuine, even if what it is being channeled toward is not what the audience thinks. The Rick candidate in the election does not fare well by the end of the episode. The election is a choice between two imperfect options in a moment of genuine political uncertainty, and the conditions of that moment favor the more radical-seeming choice. Evil Morty's campaign capitalizes on voter dissatisfaction with the status quo in a way that the Rick candidate's more conventional platform cannot match. The Rick candidate's fall is not explored in great detail in the episode. The story is not really about him. He is a vehicle for establishing the stakes and the context of the election, and once that work is done, the episode moves on. What matters is that he loses, and that his loss gives Evil Morty the presidency of the Citadel. The moment of Evil Morty's victory is depicted with the quiet drama that characterizes the entire episode. The votes are counted, the result is announced, Evil Morty has won. The crowd that is gathered to watch the results reacts with a mix of emotions. The Mortys who supported him are visibly moved. This is, for many of them, a moment that seemed impossible. A Morty winning the Citadel presidency is a genuinely historic event in the Citadel's terms, and the emotional weight of it for the Morty population is real. Evil Morty receives the news with his characteristic composure. He does not react with the joy or the relief or the gratitude that a genuine believer in the cause he campaigned on might feel. He processes the information and begins, clearly, to think about the next phase. The victory is not the destination, it is the means. The episode does not give us a full victory speech from Evil Morty after the election is announced. What we get is fragmentary, glimpses of him addressing supporters, performing the rituals of electoral victory. These glimpses are consistent with his campaign persona, accessible, warm in presentation, speaking to hope and possibility. But they are also, in retrospect, somewhat chilling. Every word is calculated. Every gesture of connection is strategic. The people in front of him, celebrating, believing, hoping, they are not, to him, what they think they are. They are the mechanism by which he achieved what he needed. Their belief in him was the fuel for the engine he built. This does not mean their belief is objectively wrong. The problems they believed in him to solve are real. The injustices he pointed at during the campaign are genuine. But Evil Morty's relationship to those injustices is not what his campaign suggested. After the election, and after the final scene in which Evil Morty has his campaign workers eliminated, the episode ends. Evil Morty is alone in his new office, president of the Citadel of Ricks, with all the power that entails. What has he actually won? He has won access to the Citadel's full institutional resources. He has won the ability to direct the Citadel's governance, to make appointments, to set priorities, to direct the institution's attention and energy toward whatever he chooses. He has won the legitimate authority of an elected head of government, which gives him both practical power and a kind of political cover. Any action he takes as president can be framed as the exercise of democratically conferred authority. He has also won information. The presidency of the Citadel would give him access to the institution's most sensitive intelligence, its records, its technical capabilities, its understanding of the multiverse it operates within. For someone who has been working toward a specific goal that requires deep knowledge of the Citadel's infrastructure and capabilities, this access is potentially more valuable than any of the formal powers of the office. The election itself, the fact that a Morty could win the Citadel presidency, leaves a lasting mark on the Citadel's political culture, even though that culture is about to be dramatically disrupted by what Evil Morty does next. It demonstrated that the Citadel's electoral system could produce an outcome that the institution's founders presumably never anticipated or intended. It showed that Morty voters, mobilized and given a genuine option, represent a significant political force. Whether this demonstration has any lasting effect beyond Evil Morty's own story is something the show does not fully explore, because the institution itself is not going to survive much longer in its current form. But the election matters as an event in itself, as evidence of the Citadel's internal contradictions and as the mechanism by which Evil Morty positioned himself to do what he was always planning to do. The election strategy is one of the clearest demonstrations of Evil Morty's particular kind of intelligence in the entire series. It is not the technical intelligence of someone who builds remote control Rick puppets. It is something more subtle, the intelligence of someone who understands human motivation, political dynamics, institutional vulnerabilities, and the gap between what people want to believe and what is actually true. This kind of intelligence is, in the Rick and Morty universe, associated with Ricks. Ricks are the ones who understand systems. Ricks are the ones who see structural vulnerabilities and exploit them. Ricks are the ones with the patience and the capacity to construct elaborate, long-term strategies. Evil Morty demonstrated this kind of intelligence in Season 1's remote control Rick plot, which required deep understanding of Rick's psychology. He demonstrates it again here in the election, which requires deep understanding of political psychology. He is consistently operating at a level of strategic sophistication that the characters around him are not prepared to recognize, because they are not prepared to believe a Morty capable of it. That is his greatest advantage, and it is the advantage he uses to position himself for what comes next. With the election won and the presidency secured, Evil Morty is in position to take the next step. The campaign was the vehicle, the office is the weapon. Whatever he was always planning to do, he now has the resources, the authority, and the access to do it. The audience does not yet know exactly what that is. The show builds the suspense of Evil Morty's presidency carefully, revealing his true agenda,
in pieces, and through implication rather than direct statement. What becomes clear in the episodes that follow is that the president of the Citadel is not governing in any recognizable sense. He is preparing. What he is preparing for is the subject of the remaining sections of this documentary. Section 6. Evil Morty takes power. President of the Citadel, governing by elimination. Winning an election and taking power are two different things. An election provides formal authority, the democratic legitimacy to hold an office and exercise its functions. But taking power, in a deeper sense, means something more than that. It means ensuring that the authority you hold can actually be exercised, that the people and institutions that might constrain that authority are unable or unwilling to do so, and that the resources you need to pursue your actual goals are available and under your control. Evil Morty understands this distinction clearly. His election as president of the Citadel gives him formal authority. What he does in the period following his election is convert that formal authority into genuine power by systematically dismantling the structures and eliminating the individuals that might limit what he can do with it. This section examines what Evil Morty does with the Citadel once he holds the presidency, and what that behavior reveals about his deeper intentions. The president of the Citadel occupies an office that is powerful, but not in a normally functioning institution, unlimited. A president in a democratic or quasi-democratic system has authority within a framework. There are other institutions, other power centers, other individuals with their own bases of authority who can check the executive if it exceeds its mandate. In the Citadel's case, the Council of Ricks has historically served as one of these constraining structures. The council predates the presidency, has significant institutional authority of its own, and is composed of Ricks who are, by definition, difficult to govern or control. They are not going to defer to a Morty president simply because he holds the office. They are going to watch him, judge him, and resist anything they consider an overreach. Evil Morty's relationship with the council, once he takes office, is therefore critically important. He cannot simply ignore them. He cannot operate as though they do not exist. But he also cannot achieve what he intends to achieve if they remain an active and effective constraining force. His solution is, by this point in his story, entirely predictable. He eliminates them. The show does not depict the elimination of the Council of Ricks in a single dramatic confrontation. It is not a coup d'etat in the traditional sense, not a military takeover or a violent seizure of power that everyone can see and identify for what it is. It is something more methodical, more patient, and ultimately more effective. Evil Morty, as president, has access to the full resources of the Citadel's institutional apparatus. This includes its intelligence services, its law enforcement capacity, its technical infrastructure, and its information networks. He uses these resources to systematically identify and deal with the individuals and structures that might challenge his authority. The council members are targeted in ways that are described in terms of institutional process: investigations, hearings, reassignments, removals for cause. The mechanisms of institutional accountability are weaponized against the institution's own traditional power centers. What looks, on the surface, like the legitimate exercise of presidential authority is actually the careful, deliberate dismantling of any meaningful check on that authority. By the time Evil Morty has been in office for any significant period, the Council of Ricks, as an effective governing body, has been neutralized. Its members are gone, dead, imprisoned, or otherwise removed from positions of influence. The institution remains nominally because institutions are hard to formally dissolve, but it no longer functions as a constraint on the president. With the council neutralized and his formal authority effectively unchecked, Evil Morty begins the work that was always the point. He uses the Citadel's full institutional resources, its technical capabilities, its research infrastructure, its access to multidimensional information, to pursue the project that has been his actual goal all along.
The show is deliberately opaque about the specifics of this phase of Evil Morty's presidency for most of Season 3 and Season 4. The audience is given glimpses of the Citadel operating under his direction, but the full picture of what he is building is withheld until Season 5, when the consequences of his project become visible. What can be observed about this phase of his governance is that he is allocating significant resources to a specific technical project. The Citadel's scientific and engineering capacity, enormous given that it is composed of parallel versions of the smartest being in the universe, is being directed toward an objective that is not publicly announced and is not the subject of transparent democratic deliberation. Evil Morty governs, in this period, without meaningful accountability to anyone. The pattern established at the end of the election, eliminating people who know too much about him, continues throughout his presidency. Anyone who might credibly expose what he is doing, anyone who represents an institutional check on his authority, anyone whose loyalty is uncertain, all of these people are dealt with. The show depicts this pattern through accumulation rather than through any single dramatic moment. We see the Citadel's internal culture shift under his governance. We see the space around him empty of potential rivals or critics. We see an institution that was always somewhat chaotic begin to take on a different quality. Not the organized chaos of a democratic institution, but the particular kind of order that comes from the exercise of unchallenged authority. This is not a pleasant picture. Evil Morty's governance of the Citadel is not benevolent. It is not, despite what his campaign implied, oriented toward the welfare of the Citadel's population. It is oriented entirely toward his own project, and the population of the Citadel, Ricks and Mortys alike, is irrelevant to that project except insofar as they might enable or impede it. The Citadel that Evil Morty governs is a different institution from the one that existed before his election. The visible changes are not necessarily dramatic or obvious on the surface. Buildings still stand, services still operate, daily life for most of the Citadel's population continues in something recognizable as its normal pattern. But underneath, the structure has changed. The old centers of power are gone. The checks on executive authority have been removed. The resources of the institution are being directed toward a project that most of its inhabitants do not know about. And the president of the Citadel is governing with the knowledge that his time in office is not meant to be permanent, that he is not building a legacy of governance, but a capability for a single decisive action. This phase of Evil Morty's story is, in narrative terms, a preparation phase. He is not the protagonist of this period of the Citadel's history in the way that protagonists are usually understood. He is a force building toward a moment, gathering what he needs, eliminating what he does not, and waiting for the right time. The technical project that Evil Morty is directing from the Citadel presidency is not fully revealed until Season 5, but the groundwork for it is being laid throughout his presidency. He needs the Citadel's technical resources to build it. He needs the Citadel's dimensional access to complete it. He needs the Citadel's institutional authority to keep it hidden from potential interference. All of these things the presidency gives him, and he uses all of them. The project is, by the time Season 5's revelations arrive, substantially complete, the result of careful, patient work over the period of his governance, conducted behind the screen of institutional authority. Evil Morty's governance of the Citadel, considered as a political event, is a demonstration of what happens when the most capable person in a room achieves unchecked authority and is not constrained by genuine accountability. The Citadel's electoral system produced this result. The Citadel's institutional structure, damaged by prior events, could not prevent it. And the result is a period of governance that serves the interests of exactly one person. This is, in its way, a satirical point that the show is making about power and institutions. The Citadel was built by Ricks, who are congenitally resistant to being governed, and the result was an institution that concentrated significant power in the hands of a small number of Ricks with limited accountability. Evil Morty exploited that same concentration of power with similarly limited accountability for different ends. The mechanism is the same. the beneficiary is different. The lesson about unchecked authority is identical. By this point in the story, the audience should be asking a specific question.
What does Evil Morty actually want? He has gone to extraordinary lengths to achieve his current position. He has murdered Ricks across multiple dimensions. He has won a multiverse presidential election through political manipulation. He has eliminated institutional checks on his authority. He has been directing the Citadel's resources toward a secret project. All of this suggests a destination, a specific goal that all of this effort is in service of. The show has been withholding that goal deliberately, revealing it only gradually and with careful timing. The full answer does not come until Season 5, but the pieces are accumulating in ways that a careful viewer can begin to assemble. Evil Morty wants out. He wants to leave the system that contains him. He wants to be free of the structure that has defined every aspect of the world he inhabits. He wants to break the cage and walk out of it into something genuinely unknown. The cage, we are about to learn, is larger than anyone realized. It is not just the Citadel. It is not just the organization of Ricks. It is the multiverse itself, or rather, a specific version of it, a bounded, shaped subset of infinite possibility that was constructed to serve one being's need to be the smartest person in the room. Understanding the cage requires understanding the Central Finite Curve. And understanding the Central Finite Curve requires going back to Rick himself, to the history of the primary Rick, Rick C-137, and the choices that shaped the universe Evil Morty inhabits. Section 7. Rick's Multiverse System. The Central Finite Curve and what it means. There is a concept at the heart of the Rick and Morty universe that, for most of the show's run, exists as background, implied rather than stated, present in the structure of the world without being named or explicitly examined. This concept is the Central Finite Curve. When the show finally names it and explains what it is in Season 5, the revelation recontextualizes everything that has come before. It is one of those moments in storytelling where a single piece of information causes a cascading reassessment of nearly every other piece of information in the narrative. And it is the piece of information that makes Evil Morty's ultimate goal fully comprehensible. This section is going to explain the Central Finite Curve, what it is, how it works, and why it matters so deeply to Evil Morty's story. The basic premise of the Rick and Morty multiverse is that there are infinite parallel dimensions, infinite universes, each one containing its own version of reality. Some of these universes are very similar to the main one. Others are radically different. The differences can be small, the outcome of a single decision, a different configuration of a minor event, or enormous, fundamentally different laws of physics, entirely different histories of life and civilization. This infinite multiverse is in principle boundlessly diverse. If there are truly infinite dimensions, then every possible configuration of reality exists somewhere. Every possible version of every character exists somewhere. Every possible outcome of every possible event exists somewhere. The show has operated within this premise from its very first episode, using the infinite multiverse as the engine for its plot. Rick's portal gun gives him access to this infinite space, allowing him to move between dimensions at will and encounter the full range of what infinite possibility looks like. But here is a question that the show does not ask directly for most of its run, even though it is latent in the premise. If the multiverse is truly infinite, and if every possible configuration of reality exists somewhere, then why does Rick seem to encounter, again and again, dimensions in which there is a Rick? Why is the multiverse, as the show depicts it, apparently full of Rick Sanchez's? In a truly infinite multiverse, most dimensions would not contain a Rick Sanchez. Most dimensions would be radically unlike the ones the show focuses on. The probability of randomly landing in a dimension with a Rick in it over and over again across hundreds of interdimensional adventures would be astronomically small if the multiverse were truly unconstrained. And yet, the show's multiverse appears to be full of Ricks. The Citadel itself is evidence of this.
It is an institution composed of parallel Ricks in such numbers that they can populate an entire floating city. The implication is that there are many, many dimensions in which a Rick Sanchez exists and has achieved extraordinary scientific capability. Why? The answer, revealed in Season 5, is the Central Finite Curve. The Central Finite Curve is not the whole multiverse. It is a specific, bounded subset of the infinite multiverse, a section of it that has been deliberately shaped to contain only those dimensions in which Rick Sanchez is the smartest being. Let that sink in. The multiverse, as the show's characters have been exploring it, is not the true infinite multiverse. It is a curated selection of dimensions that all share a single characteristic. In all of them, Rick is the smartest entity in existence. The infinite dimensions in which Rick is not the smartest being, the dimensions in which something or someone else is smarter, more capable, more powerful, are outside the curve. They are inaccessible by normal means. The Central Finite Curve is, in essence, a filter applied to infinity, a way of constraining infinite possibility to only the part of it that is favorable to Rick's position as the most exceptional being. The show reveals that the Central Finite Curve was created by Rick, or, more precisely, by the Ricks who built the Citadel and the dimensional infrastructure that the Citadel operates within. The curve is not a natural feature of the multiverse, it is a constructed thing, a product of Rick-level intelligence applied to the problem of how to ensure that the universe you inhabit is one where you remain dominant. The exact mechanics of how the curve was built are not spelled out in technical detail. This is a show that operates with mythological clarity about the significance of ideas, even when it is not providing technical specifications. What matters is the implication. The Rick-organized multiverse is a chosen world, not a natural one. It is a world where Rick is the smartest being by design rather than by accident. The Central Finite Curve has extraordinary implications. It means that everything that happens in the show, every dimension visited, every crisis navigated, every version of Rick and Morty encountered, has been happening within a bounded space that was specifically constructed to ensure Rick's dominance. The Citadel of Ricks is a monument to Rick's dominance within this bounded space. The organization of parallel Ricks governing themselves within the curve is, from one angle, an act of collective self-affirmation. Ricks recognizing each other's exceptionalism and building an institution around it. But from another angle, it is a recursion. Ricks using the bounded multiverse they created to reinforce the same assumptions about exceptionalism that led them to create the bounded multiverse in the first place. And every Morty, in every dimension within the curve is, by definition, living in a world where Rick is the smartest being. The Morty experience, as it exists within the curve, is the experience of being adjacent to the most exceptional being in your universe, in a universe that was selected specifically because it contains that being. No Morty within the curve has ever known a world where that was not true. For Evil Morty, the Central Finite Curve is the cage. It is the deepest and most fundamental level of the constraint that he is working against. The Citadel is a cage, the Rick-Morty dynamic is a cage, but the curve is the cage beneath all those cages, the foundational structure that makes all the others possible. If the curve is what defines the multiverse that all Ricks and Mortys inhabit, then breaking free of the curve means something much more significant than just escaping the Citadel. It means entering a genuinely unconstrained multiverse, infinite dimensions that were not selected for Rick's dominance, not filtered to ensure his superiority, not shaped by the same logic that made the Citadel and the Rick-Morty hierarchy possible in the first place. This is what Evil Morty wants. Not just freedom from the Citadel, not just freedom from his Rick, not just freedom from the social structure of the Rick-dominated Citadel, freedom from the entire constructed multiverse, entry into the genuinely unconstrained infinite. The Citadel exists within the curve. It is, in a sense, the curve made institutional, the physical embodiment of the assumption that Rick's dominance is the organizing principle of the multiverse. The Citadel could not exist outside the curve, because the curve is what makes the Citadel's premise coherent.
If you enter dimensions where Rick is not the most exceptional being, the entire institutional logic of the Citadel collapses. This means that destroying the Citadel is not the same as breaking the curve. The Citadel can be destroyed, and the curve can persist. The curve is deeper. It is the infrastructure, and the Citadel is a structure built on top of that infrastructure. But breaking the curve, breaching the boundary that separates the Rick-selected multiverse from the genuine infinite, would make the Citadel irrelevant even if the building itself remains standing. Because the Citadel's entire raison d'etre is to be the governing institution of a multiverse defined by Rick's dominance. Remove that defining characteristic, and the institution has no purpose. How does Evil Morty know about the Central Finite Curve? The show does not spell out the exact moment or mechanism of his discovery, which is consistent with its pattern of presenting Evil Morty's knowledge and capabilities as accomplished facts rather than as ongoing learning processes we witness in real time. What can be inferred is that his access to the Citadel's deepest institutional knowledge, the kind of access that the presidency provides, includes access to information about the multiverse structure that the Citadel operates within. The Citadel was built by Ricks who understood the curve. That understanding is presumably encoded somewhere in the Citadel's institutional knowledge, and as president, Evil Morty has access to that institutional knowledge. He may have known about the curve before becoming president if his investigation into Rick's system was sufficiently advanced. He may have learned about it through his presidency. What matters for the story is that by the time of Season 5, he knows about it, understands its significance, and has a plan to break it. The Central Finite Curve is one of the show's most conceptually ambitious ideas, and it does significant thematic work beyond just explaining the multiverse's geography. It is the ultimate expression of the show's recurring interest in the relationship between Rick's intelligence and the worlds it creates and destroys. Rick is the smartest being in the universe, within the curve. But the curve was created to ensure that this is true. Rick's exceptionalism, which feels natural and absolute throughout the show, is revealed to be, at least partially, a constructed thing. He is the smartest being in a multiverse that was shaped to make him the smartest being. What he would be in an unconstrained, infinite multiverse. How exceptional he would be, whether he would be exceptional at all in the same way, is an open question that the curve's existence makes unanswerable. This has significant implications for the entire Rick and Morty premise. If Rick's dominance is partly a product of the bounded world he inhabits, then every story told within the show, every adventure, every crisis, every demonstration of Rick's extraordinary capability has been happening within a context that was selected to showcase that capability. The show has been, on some level, happening inside a space that was constructed to be favorable to its protagonist. Evil Morty recognizes this. He understands that the world he inhabits is a managed world, not a free one. And his response to that understanding is the most radical possible. He decides to leave it entirely. The Central Finite Curve is revealed in Season 5, Episode 10, in the context of Evil Morty's final action. But understanding it requires the groundwork laid in earlier seasons, the establishment of the multiverse as a concept, the depiction of the Citadel as an institution, the accumulation of Evil Morty's power over the course of his presidency. By the time Season 5 arrives, Evil Morty has been president of the Citadel for a significant period. He has been directing its resources toward his project. He has been accumulating what he needs. And the show has been building toward a confrontation that will bring everything together. The story of Rick C-137, the story of the Citadel, and the story of Evil Morty. That confrontation is the subject of the next section. Section 8. Rick Morty. Jack, Season 5, Episode 10. Confronting Rick C-137. Season 5, Episode 10 is called Rick Morty Jack. It is the season finale, and it is one of the most significant episodes in the show's entire run. It is the episode where Evil Morty makes his final move. It is the episode where the Central Finite Curve is named and explained for the first time. It is the episode where Rick C-137's actual history, his real backstory, the thing that defines who he has become, is revealed with fuller clarity than any previous episode provided. And it is the episode where everything that Evil Morty has been building toward finally happens. This is the episode where Evil Morty breaks the cage. The episode arrives at the end of a season in which the relationship between Rick and Morty has been under particular strain. Season 5 has explored the dynamics of their relationship from multiple angles, putting pressure on the bond between them and exploring what that bond costs each of them. By the time of the finale, the two of them are reconciled and working together again, but the season's events have left marks on both of them. The episode does not begin with Evil Morty. It begins with Rick and Morty on a journey that takes them back to the Citadel in the context of Morty seeking to restore his Morty brain tanks, a specific technical detail that is not essential to the Evil Morty story, but provides the excuse for the two of them to be in the Citadel at the right time. When Rick and Morty arrive at the Citadel in this episode, they encounter an institution that is different from the one they have visited before. The differences are not immediately obvious, but they become apparent as the episode progresses. The Citadel, under Evil Morty's leadership, has been transformed, not in its physical appearance necessarily, but in its operational reality. The most significant change is the one that the audience has been building toward across several seasons. Evil Morty's secret project is apparently nearing completion. The resources of the Citadel have been directed towards something that, as it becomes clear, involves the Citadel's entire operational capacity. This is not a small project or a limited one. Whatever Evil Morty has been building, it is vast. Rick C-137's presence in the Citadel in this episode is not, initially, related to Evil Morty. He is there for the specific purpose of helping Morty with the brain tank issue. But the Citadel is not a safe place for Rick C-137, and the episode makes this clear quickly. Rick is a figure of complicated status in the Citadel, acknowledged as exceptional, but also perceived as disruptive and unreliable. His presence attracts attention. Evil Morty is aware of Rick's presence in the Citadel. He has been aware of it from the moment Rick and Morty arrived, and this awareness becomes one of the episode's central tensions. A significant portion of Rick Mirai Jack is devoted to a revelation about Rick C-137's actual history, specifically about the murder of his wife and the beginning of his journey from ordinary family man to the most dangerous being in the universe. This backstory is shown in more complete form than the audience has seen before, with specific events and their consequences laid out with unusual directness. The revelation is important to the Evil Morty story for a specific reason. It provides context for who Rick C-137 actually is, not just as a character in the present tense, but as a historical figure whose past actions have shaped the world Evil Morty is trying to escape. The details of Rick's history, the loss, the transformation, the choices that followed, are not the primary focus of this documentary, which is about Evil Morty, but they matter because they establish that Rick C-137, specifically, is not just another Rick. He is the Rick, whose choices and whose grief and whose rage helped shape the multiverse into what it is. He is, in a sense, the origin point of the entire structure that Evil Morty is trying to break. At a certain point in the episode, Evil Morty makes his move. Rick and Morty are captured, not in a dramatic action sequence, but with the efficiency and precision that characterizes everything Evil Morty does. One moment, they are operating within the Citadel's normal space. The next, they are in Evil Morty's control. This is a significant moment. Rick C-137, the most dangerous being in the universe, the Rick who has avoided and refused the Citadel's authority for the entire run of the show, is captured by the president of the Citadel. And the president of the Citadel is a Morty. The reversal is complete. The being who exists to be led is now leading. The being who was always followed is now being taken somewhere by someone he could not anticipate. Evil Morty and Rick C-137 have a confrontation that serves as the episode's philosophical center. This is, in some ways, the conversation that the entire series has been building toward. The conversation between the primary Rick and the primary Morty antagonist, where what has been implicit about the Rick-Morty relationship is made explicit. Evil Morty says something in this confrontation that is important. He does not deliver a lengthy villain speech or a detailed explanation of his motivations. He speaks with the same compressed efficiency that characterizes his communication throughout the show. But what he says makes his position clear. He is not doing this because of Rick C137 specifically. He does not have a personal vendetta against this particular Rick above all others. What he has is a position on what Ricks represent, on what the entire system of Ricks and Mortys and the Citadel and the Curve represents. And he is acting on that position. His grievance is structural, not personal. It is against the system, not any single actor within it. In this confrontation, and in the broader events of the episode's second half, the Central Finite Curve is explained to the audience. Evil Morty lays out what the curve is, the bounded multiverse, the constructed subset of infinite possibility, the space that was shaped to ensure Rick's dominance, and he makes clear what he intends to do about it. He intends to break it. He has built, using the Citadel's full institutional and technical capacity, a device or mechanism capable of breaching the boundary of the Central Finite Curve. He has been building it throughout his presidency, using the resources and access that the presidency provided. And now it is ready. The revelation of the curve's existence is presented in the episode with visual and narrative clarity that makes the concept immediate and understandable. The audience sees, for the first time, what the multiverse looks like from the outside. The curve as a bounded region within the infinite, with the unconstrained multiverse stretching beyond it in directions that cannot even be described in conventional spatial terms. Beyond the curve is everything that was filtered out, every dimension where Rick is not the smartest being, every version of reality that was not selected for his dominance. An infinite space that is genuinely free of the assumptions that made Rick's world what it is. This is where Evil Morty is going. The device that Evil Morty has built, using the Citadel's resources, is designed to breach the boundary of the Central Finite Curve, to punch through the filter and create an opening into the unconstrained multiverse beyond it. The device is physically massive, requiring the Citadel's full engineering capacity to construct and power. It represents the culmination of his entire presidency. Every decision, every resource allocation, every elimination of potential interference, all of it in service of building this one thing. The technical details of how the device works are not spelled out in the show. This is not a hard science fiction series, and the mechanics are less important than the concept. What matters is what the device does and why it matters. It is, in the most literal sense, a freedom machine. It opens the door to a multiverse that was not shaped to serve anyone's agenda. It is the physical expression of Evil Morty's fundamental desire to be free of the system. The primary Morty, Rick C137's Morty, is present throughout this episode, and his presence is significant. He watches what happens. He hears what Evil Morty says. He sees the Citadel transformed and directed toward this one final purpose. He is, in a sense, the witness to Evil Morty's story, the representative of the Morty experience who is present for its most extreme expression. The show uses this dynamic carefully. The primary Morty's reactions to Evil Morty's actions and words are not shown with simple clarity. There is complexity in what he witnesses, questions it raises for him about his own situation, his own relationship with Rick, his own future. These questions are not resolved within the episode, and they extend beyond it into the show's ongoing narrative. But they are present, and they give the primary Morty's presence in the episode a weight that goes beyond just being a companion for Rick. Evil Morty's capture of Rick and Morty in this episode is not just a plot event, it has a political dimension as well. Rick C137 has always represented a kind of challenge to the Citadel, the Rick who refuses to be governed, who operates outside the institution's jurisdiction, who insists on his own exceptionalism against the collective. Capturing him is, for the Citadel's institutional logic, a statement. Even the most independent Rick is not beyond reach. But Evil Morty's use of this capture is not to demonstrate the Citadel's power for its own sake. He captures Rick because he needs something from this particular moment, the full expression of his victory over the system, or because Rick C-137's presence at the finale of his plan has symbolic significance that is not accidental. Rick C-137, of all Ricks, is the one whose history is most deeply entangled with what the curve represents. His presence at the moment the curve is broken is, in some sense, appropriate. Rick Mirai Jack is not a detached or cold episode, despite dealing with concepts of extraordinary scale. It is an emotionally charged episode, and the emotions are not simple ones.
There is something triumphant about Evil Morty's achievement. He has done something extraordinary, something that was supposed to be impossible, something that represents the fulfillment of a commitment he has held through years of patient, dangerous work. That achievement commands a certain respect, regardless of the methods used to reach it. At the same time, there is something genuinely horrifying about what his presidency has entailed. The eliminations, the use of institutional authority for personal ends, the weaponization of the electoral process, the manipulation of Morty voters who believed in a candidacy that was never sincere. Evil Morty is not a sympathetic hero. He is a character whose goals are understandable, but whose methods are not defensible by any conventional moral standard. The episode holds this tension without resolving it. It does not tell you how to feel about Evil Morty. It shows you what he does and leaves the moral assessment to the audience. By the end of this episode's key confrontation, the full scope of what Evil Morty has accomplished is visible. He has gone from a hidden Morty operating a remote control Rick device in Season 1 to the president of the Citadel to the architect of a plan that will breach the most fundamental structure of the multiverse itself. He has done all of this while remaining largely invisible as a threat until it was too late for anyone to stop him. He has worked within the system until he was in a position to destroy it. And then he destroyed it. The scale is extraordinary. It is also, in retrospect, coherent. Every step follows from the previous one with a certain logic. He built up capability incrementally, used each level of capability to access the next level, and never tipped his hand prematurely. This is planning of a genuinely exceptional order, and its exceptional character is the whole point. This is what a Morty looks like when a Morty decides to be exceptional. What comes next? The events of Rick Mirai Jack's confrontation and capture lead directly to the episode's climax, the moment when Evil Morty actually executes his plan and breaks the Central Finite Curve. That moment is the subject of the next section. But before we get there, it is worth sitting with the significance of what this episode accomplishes in terms of the story. It brings together the two primary threads of the show, Rick's personal history and Evil Morty's institutional story, and resolves them, at least temporarily, in the same event. It names the Central Finite Curve and explains its significance. It shows us Evil Morty at the height of his power and the moment before his most significant action. And it does all of this with the narrative confidence of a show that knows exactly where it is going and how to get there. The next section tells the story of what happens when Evil Morty actually does what he came to do. Section 9. Destroying the Citadel. Breaking the Central Finite Curve. The destruction of the Central Finite Curve is not a small thing. It is not a minor plot event that moves the story forward and then is set aside for the next adventure. It is, by any measure, one of the most significant events in the Rick and Morty narrative. A moment where a character who has been building toward a goal for multiple seasons finally achieves that goal in a way that changes the shape of the world the show inhabits. This section examines the destruction of the curve in detail. What happens, how it happens, what it looks like, and what it means for the Citadel, for Rick, for Morty, and for the show as a whole. Rick Mirai Jack reaches its climax with Evil Morty executing the final phase of his plan. Having captured Rick and Morty, having neutralized any remaining institutional opposition to his authority, and having completed the device built using the Citadel's full resources,
He is ready. The final phase is the activation of the breach device, the mechanism that will punch through the boundary of the Central Finite Curve and open a passage into the unconstrained multiverse beyond. The activation of this device is what the entire episode has been building toward, and what the entirety of Evil Morty's multi-season arc has been building toward. The process of activation is not instantaneous. The episode depicts it building, energy accumulating, systems engaging, the scale of what is happening becoming progressively more visible in the physical environment around the Citadel. This is not a button being pressed and an immediate result appearing. This is a massive, complex system coming online, a device of extraordinary scale and power doing what it was built to do. The show's animation makes excellent use of the opportunity that this sequence presents. The breach of the Central Finite Curve is depicted with a visual grammar that conveys both the technical reality of what is happening and its emotional weight. The colors, the spatial language, the way the Citadel relates to the emerging breach, all of it communicates that this is something unprecedented, something for which the existing visual vocabulary of the show's universe does not have adequate precedent. Beyond the curve, the show gives us a glimpse of what exists there, the unconstrained multiverse, depicted as something genuinely alien to the visual logic of the show's regular world. It is different. The colors are different. The spatial logic is different. The sense of what is possible there is different. It is genuinely beyond, in a way that the show's visual design makes immediate and legible. The breach of the Central Finite Curve does not leave the Citadel intact. The Citadel was built as an institution of the curve. It was designed to operate within the bounded multiverse, dependent on the infrastructure and logic of that bounded space. When the curve is breached and the boundary breaks down, the Citadel cannot simply continue to function as it was. The foundational context of its existence has changed catastrophically. The Citadel is destroyed. The institution that Evil Morty has been president of, that he has been using as a tool for his plan, that he has been hollowing out of its normal functions and refilling with his own project, collapses. The physical structure, the political organization, the social hierarchy, all of it goes in the breach. This is not an accidental consequence that Evil Morty did not anticipate. He knew what the activation of the device would do to the Citadel. He planned for it. The destruction of the Citadel is not a side effect of breaking the curve. It is part of the design. The Citadel exists within the curve, dependent on the curve, and cannot survive the curve's destruction. Evil Morty built a device to destroy something he was supposed to be governing. The presidency was always the means to this end. What happens to the Ricks and Mortys who live in the Citadel when it is destroyed is a question that the episode does not fully answer with explicit accounting of every individual. What is clear is that the Citadel's destruction is catastrophic for the institution and for those within it. The scale of what the device does is not limited or contained, it is total. This is one of the most morally complex aspects of Evil Morty's story. The Citadel, for all its injustices, is also home to a population of Ricks and Mortys who are living their lives within it, working, struggling, hoping, suffering, as the Ricklantis Mixup episode made movingly clear. The factory workers, the police officers, the simple Ricks employees, the voters who believed in Evil Morty's campaign, all of them are in the Citadel when it is destroyed. Evil Morty did this knowing what it would mean for them. He calculated the cost and accepted it as necessary. Whether the audience accepts his reasoning is a moral question that the show does not answer for you. It presents the calculation and the action and leaves the judgment to the viewer. Rick C137 and the primary Morty are present during the destruction of the Citadel. Rick has been in Evil Morty's custody, and the events of the sequence involve him attempting to navigate this extraordinary and dangerous situation with the resources available to him. Rick is not helpless, he is Rick, and even in a moment of extraordinary crisis, he brings to bear the full weight of his intelligence and his survival instincts. But the situation is, for once, genuinely beyond his immediate control. Evil Morty has built something that Rick cannot easily counter in the time available. The device is too advanced, too far along in its activation, too deeply integrated into the Citadel's infrastructure.
Rick and Morty survive the destruction. They escape the Citadel as it goes, emerging on the other side of the catastrophe alive and together. But they emerge into a changed multiverse, a multiverse where the Central Finite Curve has been breached and the Citadel is gone. The moment that is perhaps the most visually and emotionally striking in the entire sequence is Evil Morty's departure. As the breach opens and the Citadel collapses, Evil Morty walks toward the opening. He walks through it. He enters the unconstrained multiverse beyond the Central Finite Curve. He does not look back. He does not pause. He does not express any visible regret for what he has done or any anxiety about where he is going. He walks forward with the same calm, composed, forward-directed energy that has characterized everything he has done from his first appearance. He walks out of the show's world entirely into something that the show has explicitly established is beyond the territory it normally explores. He walks into the genuinely unknown. The visual of Evil Morty walking through the breach into the unconstrained multiverse is one of the show's most memorable images. It is simple, a figure walking through a doorway into light. But everything about how it is staged and lit and composed gives it enormous weight. The doorway is the breach he built. The light on the other side is the unconstrained multiverse. Genuinely alien, genuinely unknown, not filtered or shaped by any Rick's need to be dominant. He built this doorway. He planned for years to build it. He sacrificed people and burned institutions to build it. And now it is built, and he walks through it, and the door closes behind him. Whether the door closes in a literal sense, whether the breach is sealed after his passage or remains as a permanent alteration to the multiverse, is not made immediately clear. What is clear is that Evil Morty is gone from the territory the show normally inhabits. One detail of Evil Morty's departure that is important to note is the fact that he is crying as he walks through the breach. The tears are visible, the audience can see them. This is, in retrospect, one of the most significant details in his entire story. Evil Morty has been, throughout his appearances in the show, almost entirely controlled and composed. He does not show vulnerability, he does not express weakness, he communicates his emotional states, if at all, through the efficiency and precision of his actions, rather than through visible emotional expression. The tears in this moment are a departure from that pattern. They represent something. They tell us that even for Evil Morty, this moment is not purely strategic. This departure, this walking through the door he built, this act of final freedom, it means something to him that goes beyond the tactical. He is moved by it. Whatever he is feeling as he walks through that breach, it is real in a way that his campaign performances and his political presentations were not. What is he feeling? The show does not tell us explicitly. Joy, perhaps. The fulfillment of something he has been working toward for a very long time. Grief, perhaps, for the cost of what it took to get here, or for the world he is leaving, even a world he hated. Something more complicated, the particular emotion of a goal achieved at a price that was worth it, but was still a price. The tears do not change what he did. They do not redeem the means he used or excuse the people he killed. But they suggest that underneath the extraordinary strategic intelligence and the ruthless calculation, there is something that feels. That is, in its way, humanizing, even for a character who has done genuinely terrible things in service of his goal. The destruction of the Central Finite Curve and the Citadel of Ricks is significant on multiple levels simultaneously. On the most immediate level, it is the resolution of Evil Morty's multi-season arc. He achieved what he set out to achieve. On the level of the show's mythology, it fundamentally changes the structure of the world the narrative inhabits. The bounded multiverse that defined the show's setting from the beginning no longer exists in the same way. On the thematic level, it is a statement about systems of control and what it takes to break them. The curve was built by Ricks and sustained by Ricks and represented in its most essential form Rick's need to be the most powerful being in his world. Breaking the curve is a statement that Rick's dominance was constructed rather than natural, and that what was constructed can be dismantled. This is a radical statement for the show to make about its own protagonist. Rick is, in most readings of the show, the central figure, the genius around whom everything orbits. Revealing that his genius exists within a constructed container and showing a Morty destroy that container is a significant act of narrative destabilization. Rick C-137 survives the destruction and is left in a changed multiverse. The immediate aftermath of the Citadel's destruction is chaos for him. Practical, logistical chaos about where to go and what to do. But underneath the practical chaos is something more fundamental. The world that Rick has been operating in his entire life is, in a specific sense, no longer the same world.
The bounded multiverse that was curated to contain dimensions where he is the smartest being has been breached. The filter has been punctured. What this means practically for Rick's navigation of the multiverse going forward, whether the breach affects the dimensions he can access, whether the multiverse he inhabits is now different in ways that matter to his day-to-day experience, is something the show will explore in subsequent episodes. What is clear is that Rick is confronted in this moment with a truth about his world that he presumably did not fully reckon with before. The multiverse he knew was shaped. The Citadel he operated alongside was the institutional expression of that shaping, and a Morty destroyed it. The destruction of the Citadel and the breach of the Curve represent in total the clearest possible statement about who Evil Morty is and what drives him. He is not a villain who wants power for its own sake. He used power to destroy the institution that gave him power, which is not the behavior of someone who values power intrinsically. He is not motivated by revenge in a simple sense. His actions are not directed at any single individual, but at a system. He is someone who looked at the world he was given and decided that the world itself was the problem. Not the specific Rick who happened to be his companion, not the specific Citadel policies that disadvantaged Mortys, not any fixable particularity of the system. The system itself, the bounded multiverse shaped to serve one being's dominance, was the problem, and his solution was to break it. This is a radical response, and the show presents it as such. It does not celebrate Evil Morty's destruction of the Citadel as unambiguously good. It does not frame his escape as a triumphant liberation that everyone should cheer. It presents a complicated event, catastrophic for many, necessary from Evil Morty's perspective, significant for the show's mythology, and asks the audience to sit with its complexity. Section 10. Beyond the Curve. Evil Morty's legacy and what his story means. Evil Morty walks through the breach into the unconstrained multiverse, and then he is gone. This is where the confirmed story of Evil Morty ends, as of the episodes the show has produced. He does not appear in the episodes that follow Rick Mirai Jack within the show's run to date. He has achieved his goal and departed. The story, from the perspective of what the show has shown, is complete in the most important sense. He did what he set out to do, and he left. But the ending of Evil Morty's story is not a simple full stop. The departure raises questions, creates consequences, and leaves a legacy that continues to resonate in the episodes that follow. And the meaning of his story, what it says about the show, about its characters, about its themes, is something that deserves careful examination even after the character himself has exited the narrative. This final section is going to look at all of that, the aftermath of his departure, the legacy of what he did, the meaning of his story, and what his existence tells us about the world of Rick and Morty. The breach of the Central Finite Curve and the destruction of the Citadel leave the world of Rick and Morty genuinely different from what it was before. The structure of the multiverse that the show had been operating within is no longer intact in the same way. The institutional organization of parallel Ricks is gone. The governing body that regulated interactions across dimensions has been destroyed. The practical consequences of this for the characters and for the narrative are significant. Rick C-137 is, in the episodes that follow, navigating a changed world. The Citadel is not there as a background presence in the multiverse anymore. The Council of Ricks is not an institution that can respond to crises or assert authority. The organized collective of parallel Ricks that has been a fixture of the show's mythology since Season 1 is simply gone. This changes Rick's position in the multiverse in subtle but real ways. He has always operated in tension with the Citadel, sometimes cooperating, sometimes defying it, always aware of it as a presence. Without the Citadel, that particular tension dissolves. He is more isolated in a sense, but also more free. The organization that occasionally attempted to govern him is no more. The breach of the Central Finite Curve means that the multiverse the show's characters now have access to, in principle at least, is no longer the filtered, curated subset of dimensions where Rick is the smartest being. The infinite dimensions beyond the curve are now accessible. Whether the characters actually access them and what they might find there is territory the show can explore going forward. The implications of this are difficult to overstate, at least in terms of the show's setting and premise. For the entire run of the show, every dimensional adventure has been happening within the curve, within the space where Rick is exceptional, where his intelligence places him above everyone he encounters. Stepping outside the curve into the unconstrained multiverse would mean entering dimensions where that is no longer true, where Rick might not be the smartest being, where the assumption of Rick's dominance does not hold. Evil Morty understood the significance of this. He chose to go there, into that unconstrained space, knowing that it meant leaving behind everything he knew. He chose uncertainty and genuine freedom over the familiar constraints of a known world. That choice is the ultimate expression of his character. The question of whether Evil Morty actually achieved what he was trying to achieve is worth examining carefully, because it is not as simple as it might appear. He broke the Central Finite Curve. He destroyed the Citadel. He escaped into the unconstrained multiverse. By the literal terms of his apparent goal, to be free of the system that constrained him, he succeeded. He is gone. He is beyond the reach of Ricks, beyond the Citadel, beyond the bounded world. In that specific sense, he won. But victory in a story rarely means unambiguous success in every dimension. The question of what Evil Morty actually finds beyond the curve, what freedom actually looks like in the unconstrained multiverse, whether the world beyond the curve is, in fact, better or just different, these questions the show does not answer, because Evil Morty does not return to report. He leaves, and what happens to him after is genuinely unknown. The ending of his story, as the show has told it, is an open door. He walked through it. What is on the other side is, deliberately, left for the imagination. One of the more uncomfortable aspects of the conclusion of Evil Morty's story is what it means for the Morty population of the Citadel. Evil Morty's campaign was built on representing Mortys, on speaking to their experience of inequality and disadvantage in the Citadel, on promising that their situation would improve under his leadership. He was not sincere about any of this. The campaign was a vehicle, and the Morty voters who believed in it were tools. And when he executed his plan and the Citadel was destroyed, those same Morty voters were in the Citadel. The people he claimed to represent were present for the institution's destruction. The show does not dwell on this. It does not take an explicit position on it, but it is there, and it is part of what makes Evil Morty's story morally complex rather than straightforwardly heroic. He escaped a system that oppressed Mortys. He did it by using Mortys, by exploiting their political participation, by making them believe in a candidacy that was never sincere. The irony of his liberation is that it was built on the same exploitation of Morty trust and Morty participation that characterized the system he was escaping. Across the show's history, Evil Morty's story raises a persistent question about justification. Can the goal of personal freedom, no matter how genuine and no matter how comprehensible, justify the methods used to achieve it? Can the destruction of an unjust system justify the deaths that result from that destruction, particularly when many of those deaths belong to people who were themselves disadvantaged by the system? The show does not answer these questions. It is not that kind of show. It does not impose moral lessons or deliver verdicts on its characters.
It presents situations and lets them be what they are, trusting the audience to engage with the complexity. What can be said is that Evil Morty's story is structured to make the questions unavoidable. You cannot watch his full arc without confronting them, and that confrontation is, arguably, the point. The story is not designed to tell you what to conclude. It is designed to make you think carefully about the questions it raises. Evil Morty represents several things simultaneously in the context of the show's thematic framework. He represents the possibility of Morty exceptionalism, the idea that the Morty template, the assumption of Morty ordinariness, is not a fixed fact but a social construction that can be exceeded. He is the proof that a Morty can be extraordinary, can be dangerous, can exceed every expectation placed on them by the system they inhabit. Whether his particular form of exceptionalism is admirable is another question, but its existence is undeniable and significant. He represents a critique of the Rick-Morty relationship from the inside. He is the Morty who did not accept the relationship's terms. He is the answer to the question of what happens when a Morty decides that the power imbalance is unacceptable. And the answer the show gives is a complicated one, not a straightforward liberation narrative, but something thornier and more honest about what resistance to entrenched power actually involves. He represents a critique of institutional power more broadly. The Citadel, as he found it and as he exploited it, is a study in how power structures perpetuate themselves and how those structures can be dismantled by someone willing to work from within and without conventional limitations of method. His story is, in this sense, a story about how change actually happens in systems that are designed to prevent it. And he represents the logical endpoint of a specific kind of intelligence applied to a specific kind of grievance. He did not just feel that the system was unjust, he understood the system, mapped it, found its vulnerabilities, and exploited them systematically until he had the power to destroy it. That is a particular kind of intelligence, and the show presents it with respect, even as it shows its costs. The primary Morty, Rick C137's Morty, the Morty the audience has followed throughout the show, witnesses Evil Morty's story from a position that is unique and complicated. He is a Morty who has been shaped by his relationship with Rick in all the ways that Evil Morty identified as problematic. He has been used, endangered, dismissed, and valued by the same Rick. He has experienced the power imbalance of the Rick-Morty relationship from the inside. Watching Evil Morty, watching a version of himself who decided to respond to that imbalance with extraordinary violence and manipulation, must be a complex experience for the primary Morty. The show does not fully externalize this complexity in explicit dialogue or reflection, but it is there in the narrative subtext of his presence during the events of Rick Morty Jack. Does the primary Morty agree with Evil Morty? Does he understand him? Does he wish he had made different choices himself? The show leaves these questions open, trusting the audience to bring them to the primary Morty's story going forward. What the encounter with Evil Morty means for Morty's understanding of his own situation and his own choices is something that the ongoing narrative can explore without having to resolve. Rick C137's response to the events of Rick Morty Jack, to Evil Morty's plan, to the destruction of the curve, to the departure beyond it, is also complex and not fully externalized in explicit reflection. But the event clearly matters to him in ways that go beyond the immediate practical crisis. He is confronted with a version of a Morty who outsmarted him, who built something he did not anticipate, who used the Citadel that Rick always disdained against itself with more effectiveness than any attack from outside could have achieved, who went somewhere Rick cannot follow, into a multiverse that Rick's entire world was built to exclude. The humbling of Rick, the acknowledgement that his intelligence operates within a constructed framework that can be dismantled, is part of what the Evil Morty story accomplishes for the show's treatment of its primary character. Rick's exceptionalism is real, but it is contextual. It exists within a world that was shaped to produce it. And Evil Morty, in breaking that world, forces Rick to confront that contextuality. One of the most impressive things about the Evil Morty story arc is the consistency with which the show refuses to resolve his moral ambiguity into something cleaner. He is never simply a villain, but he is also never simply a hero. He is a character with a comprehensible goal and genuinely terrible methods, and the show holds that tension without collapsing it in either direction. This is harder to do than it looks. Television storytelling has strong genre conventions around characters like Evil Morty, conventions that tend toward either villain comeuppance or hero vindication. He gets neither. He succeeds and he leaves. The audience is given no verdict, no moral conclusion, no authoritative statement about whether what he did was right or wrong. The refusal to resolve the ambiguity is itself a statement. It says that the questions Evil Morty raises are genuine questions, not questions with easy answers, not questions that the show can settle for you. They are questions about freedom and exploitation and the cost of resistance, and they do not have clean resolutions. They are the kind of questions that you carry with you after the story ends. The Citadel of Ricks is gone. The Central Finite Curve is breached. These are permanent facts of the world the show now operates within, as far as can be determined from subsequent episodes. The institution that was the largest collective expression of Rick's dominance no longer exists. The bounded multiverse that was shaped to ensure that dominance is no longer bounded in the same way. This is a significant inheritance for the show to carry forward. The world of Rick and Morty is, after the events of Rick, Morty, Jack, genuinely different from the world that existed in the show's first episode. Evil Morty changed things in a way that is not reversible. The cage is broken, and the prisoner is gone, and the warden is left to figure out what to do in a world without the cage. Whether and how the show explores that changed world, what it means for Rick and Morty's adventures going forward, and whether any of the threads that Evil Morty's story raised are picked up and examined in the show's continuing narrative, all of this is the ongoing work of a series that is proven capable of genuine long-term storytelling. One of the details of Rick, Morty, Jack that viewers remember most vividly is the music that accompanies Evil Morty's departure. The show is known for its precise and often unexpected use of music, and the choice of music for this sequence is particularly deliberate. The music, the specific track that plays as Evil Morty walks through the breach, is called Quote One by Blonde Redhead. It is the same track that was used in his very first reveal in Season 1. The callback is pointed and meaningful. The show is drawing a direct line between who Evil Morty was when he was first discovered, hidden, escaped, unknown, and who he is now as he departs, triumphant, purposeful, free. The use of the same music bookends his story within the show's run. It says, "This is one complete thing. This is the story of someone who started in hiding and ended in the open light of a breach into the infinite." The same music, different context, different meaning. The same person, but arrived, finally, where they always intended to go. Evil Morty is one of the most carefully constructed characters in modern animated television. He is built with patience and precision across multiple seasons. Every appearance adds a layer. Every action serves a purpose. Every revelation recontextualizes what came before. And the conclusion of his story, as the show has told it, is genuinely earned, not just by the plot mechanics, but by the thematic logic that runs through every moment of his arc. He is a character whose story asks questions that are not comfortable. It asks whether the world that seemed natural was actually constructed. It asks whether the power of the exceptional is as inherent as it feels, or whether it was shaped by choices and structures that serve specific interests. It asks whether resistance to an unjust system is justified, even when that resistance causes enormous collateral harm. It asks what freedom means when the cage is not just an institution, but the fabric of reality itself. These are not small questions. They are the kind of questions that stay with you. And the fact that Evil Morty, a character who first appeared as a hidden figure controlling a puppet Rick in a pocket dimension, became the vehicle for questions of this size and significance, is a remarkable achievement of storytelling. He was always the most dangerous variable in the multiverse. Not because he was the most violent, though he was violent. Not because he was the most powerful, though he accumulated significant power. But because he was the one who understood the rules well enough to break them. All the way down to the foundational rules, the rules that shape the multiverse itself.
And when he broke them, he walked through the hole he made and disappeared into the genuinely free space on the other side. That is his story. It ends with tears and forward motion, with the door he built opening into the light of everything that was kept from him, with the measured, composed step of someone who has done exactly what they came to do. Evil Morty is gone, but what he did remains. The curve is broken, the Citadel is dust, and somewhere beyond the boundary of Rick's curated infinity, a Morty is walking through the unconstrained multiverse, finally free.